Dear friends, after a tiring and stressful day, welcome to Mysterious Sleep Stories. Here, the boundaries between the waking world and the realm of shadows transform into something far more intriguing than simple ghost stories. On your unexplained journey tonight, we'll explore one of America's most persistently haunted places, a place where the past refuses to stay buried, where guests enter but some never quite leave. We're talking about the Hotel Monte Vista in Flagstaff, Arizona. A grand lady of hospitality, welcoming both the living and the dead since 1927. So settle in, relax, and let me tell you about the ticking sounds coming from unexpected places and everything that shouldn't be there within those historic walls, but somehow is. Part 1. The Building of a Legend, Flagstaff's Grand Hotel. Picture yourself standing on the corner of San Francisco Street and Aspen Avenue in downtown Flagstaff, Arizona, sometime in the mid-1920s. The town is buzzing with the kind of energy that comes from being situated along Route 66, that ribbon of highway connecting Chicago to Los Angeles, carrying dreamers and travelers across the American landscape. Flagstaff itself sits at nearly 7,000 feet elevation in the mountains of northern Arizona, surrounded by ponderosa pine forests and blessed with 4 distinct seasons, a rarity in the desert Southwest. The town has been growing steadily since its founding in the 1870s, serving as a lumber center, a ranching community, and increasingly as a stopover point for tourists heading to the Grand Canyon, which lies just 80 miles to the north. In this era of American optimism and expansion, the citizens of Flagstaff decided they needed something grand, something that would put their mountain town on the map as a destination worthy of attention. They wanted a hotel that could compete with the finest establishments in Phoenix or Albuquerque, a place where Hollywood stars traveling Route 66 might choose to spend the night, where railroad executives and timber barons would feel at home, where the growing tourist trade could be accommodated in style and comfort. The vision came together through community investment. Rather than waiting for some distant corporation or wealthy individual to build their grand hotel, the people of Flagstaff took matters into their own hands. They launched a public stock offering, selling shares to local residents, businesses, and civic organizations. Everybody wanted a piece of this dream. The local newspaper, the Arizona Daily Sun, promoted the stock sale with headlines proclaiming that this would be Flagstaff's finest hotel, a crown jewel for the mountain community. Barbershops, general stores, banks, and private citizens all invested their hard-earned money. Even school children contributed their pennies and nickels, buying fractional shares in the hope that their town would have a hotel worthy of its ambitions and its growing importance as a crossroads community. By the time the stock offering closed, the community had raised enough capital to break ground on their ambitious project. The architectural firm of Hunt and Burns was commissioned to design the building, and they delivered something that blended the prevailing Spanish colonial revival style with mission revival elements, creating a structure that would look both timeless and distinctly Southwestern. The plans called for a 3-story building constructed primarily of brick, faced with stucco to give it that distinctive Southwestern appearance that would appeal to tourists seeking an authentic regional experience. The design incorporated large windows to take advantage of Flagstaff's crisp mountain light, a grand lobby that would serve as the social heart of downtown Flagstaff, and guest rooms that promise modern conveniences like private baths, steam heat, and hot and cold running water, luxuries that not every hotel could offer in those days, especially not in a mountain town. Construction began in 1926, and the entire town watched as the structure rose from the rocky earth like a monument to communal ambition. Local laborers mixed mortar and laid bricks under the supervision of skilled masons. Craftsmen installed elaborate ceiling beams and decorative tiles imported from California and Mexico. Electricians wired the building for the modern age, installing fixtures that would provide electric lighting throughout, a significant upgrade from the gas lamps that still illuminated many buildings. Plumbers ensured that every room would have proper facilities, running water being a mark of sophistication that would set the Monte Vista apart from cheaper accommodations. The work progressed through the summer and fall, through the winter when Flagstaff's elevation meant snow and freezing temperatures that slowed construction, and into the following year as finishing touches were added. Every phase of construction was documented in the local papers with progress reports that read like dispatches from an exciting frontier. The community followed along eagerly, watching their investment take physical form, brick by brick, floor by floor. There was pride in seeing local workers building something that would last, that would serve the community for generations, that would put Flagstaff on the map as more than just a lumber town or a way station for travelers. On January 1st, 1927, the Hotel Monte Vista officially opened its doors to great fanfare. The name itself was carefully chosen, telegraphing the hotel's mountain location and the spectacular views it offered. Monte, meaning mountain in Spanish, and Vista, meaning view, together evoking the hotel's setting in a mountain town with its spectacular vistas of the San Francisco peaks, the highest point in Arizona at 12,633 feet, visible from the hotel's upper floors on clear days. The opening was celebrated as a community triumph, with newspaper accounts describing the grand lobby with its exposed beam ceilings, its mission-style furniture carefully selected to create an atmosphere of Southwestern elegance, its sense of occasion and permanence that suggested this was a building that would endure. The rooms, numbered sequentially from 100 to 300 across 3 floors, were appointed with the best furnishings available within the budget constraints. Each floor had its own character, its own layout, its own collection of quirks that come from being designed in an era before standardization became the norm in hotel construction. The first floor housed the lobby, the dining room, and what would eventually become the famous bar. The second and third floors contained the guest rooms, each with its own bathroom, a luxury that not every hotel of the era could boast. The rooms were modest by later standards, but comfortable and well appointed for their time. The timing of the hotel's opening was both fortunate and precarious. On the fortunate side, Route 66 was being completed just as the Monte Vista opened, meaning that the stream of cross-country travelers would soon be flowing through Flagstaff in unprecedented numbers, bringing business that would help the hotel establish itself financially. On the precarious side, the stock market crash of 1929 was just 2 years away, and the Great Depression that followed would test every business in America, hotels included. But in those first years, before the economic catastrophe, the Hotel Monte Vista thrived in ways that exceeded its investors' hopes. Hollywood discovered the hotel almost immediately, drawn by Flagstaff's proximity to spectacular landscapes perfect for filming. The hotel's location made it perfect for film crews heading to the area to shoot westerns and adventure films. The surrounding country, with its high desert mesas, its ponderosa forests, and its proximity to the Grand Canyon and Monument Valley, provided backdrops that cinematographers loved, offering a diversity of landscapes within relatively easy reach. and the Monte Vista provided accommodations that Hollywood's elite found acceptable, a crucial consideration for stars who were accustomed to luxury and who might otherwise refuse to travel to remote locations for filming. The guest registry from those early years reads like a Hollywood who's who, a testament to the hotel's success in attracting notable clientele. John Wayne stayed the Monte Vista multiple times, drawn by the Western film productions in the area and by his own affection for Arizona's high country, which he considered authentic cowboy territory. Bing Crosby checked in, bringing with him the easy charm and musical talent that made him one of the biggest stars of his era. Carole Lombard, the comedic actress whose beauty and vivacity captivated audiences, stayed at the hotel during filming in the region. Jane Russell, the sultry star who captured America's imagination with her stunning looks and screen presence, spent nights in the Monte Vista's rooms between takes on location shoots. Even Spencer Tracy, one of the finest actors of the golden age of Hollywood, passed through the hotel's lobby, his presence adding to the establishment's growing reputation as a place where fame and talent gathered. But it wasn't just movie stars who made the Monte Vista their temporary home. The hotel became the de facto center of Flagstaff's social life, serving functions far beyond simple accommodation. The bar on the ground floor, which would later be known as the Monte Vista Cocktail Lounge, became the place where timber executives sealed deals over whiskey, where railroad men gathered after long runs to unwind and swap stories, where locals and travelers mixed in that peculiarly democratic way that Western saloons encouraged, class distinctions softening under the influence of shared drinks and conversation. The dining room served meals that attempted to bring a touch of sophistication to mountain living, offering steaks from local ranches alongside more refined dishes that would appeal to the hotel's cosmopolitan guests. Wedding receptions were held in the hotel's event spaces, local families celebrating their happiest occasions in the town's finest establishment. Business conferences convened in its meeting rooms, Flagstaff's growing commercial sector using the Monte Vista as neutral ground for negotiations and planning. Social clubs held their gatherings there. Traveling salesmen made it their base of operations while working the region. The Monte Vista wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a living, breathing part of the community that had built it, serving as a gathering place, a status symbol, a mark of civic pride. Now, here's where the story takes its first turn toward the strange, because even in those early years, even in that initial flush of success and optimism, there were hints that something else occupied the Hotel Monte Vista along with its paying guests. Staff members, those who worked the late shifts or cleaned rooms in the quiet morning hours, began to notice peculiarities that they couldn't easily explain. Doors that had been firmly closed would be found standing open when staff returned to a hallway they just left. The sound of footsteps would echo from hallways that, when investigated, proved to be empty. No guests walking, no staff present, just the sound of someone moving with purpose through spaces that should have been vacant. Guests would occasionally mention unusual experiences in passing, strange sounds in the night that woke them, the feeling of being watched when they were alone in their rooms, cold spots that appeared without explanation, though in those early years such complaints were rare and easily dismissed by management eager to maintain the hotel's reputation. After all, guests who reported ghosts might discourage other guests from booking rooms, and a new hotel couldn't afford to develop a reputation for being haunted when it was still trying to establish itself as a respectable establishment. The hotel, after all, was new, built on land that had previously been undeveloped. Old buildings develop reputations for being haunted, their long histories providing time for tragedies to occur and legends to accumulate. But new structures are supposed to be free of such associations, clean slates without the baggage of past deaths or dramatic events. Any odd occurrences could be explained away as the building's settling, its materials expanding and contracting with temperature changes, as the unfamiliarity of guests with the hotel's particular acoustics creating misperceptions, as the tricks that light and shadow play in an unfamiliar place, making people see things that aren't really there. And so, for the most part, these early strange reports were noted but not dwelled upon, filed away in the backs of minds as curiosities rather than patterns, dismissed as the kind of thing that happens in any building, nothing to be concerned about. Staff members might mention to each other that they'd heard footsteps when no one was there, but they didn't report formally or make a fuss. Guests who experienced something unusual might mention it to the front desk, but usually in a joking way, not seriously claiming to have encountered anything supernatural. But patterns, as we'll see, have a way of emerging over time, even when we don't want to see them, even when we actively try to dismiss them as coincidence or imagination. The Hotel Monte Vista was accumulating stories from its very first year of operation, building toward the reputation it would eventually earn as one of the most reliably haunted locations in the American Southwest. Every guest who checked in, every staff member who worked a shift, every event held in its spaces was adding to the layered history of the place, creating the conditions that would eventually make the Monte Vista famous for reasons its original investors could never have anticipated. The building itself, solid and substantial as it appeared, constructed of brick and steel and concrete, was accumulating something beyond memories, beyond the normal residue that buildings collect from the lives lived within them. It was accumulating presence, accumulating energy, accumulating what would eventually manifest as the phenomena that would define its character for the rest of its existence. And while the guests of 1927 and 1928 and 1929 went about their business, checking in and checking out, sleeping and waking, celebrating and conducting business, the Hotel Monte Vista was quietly becoming something more than just a hotel, something more complex than a simple building designed to house travelers. It was becoming a threshold, a place where the normal rules didn't quite apply, where the past and present existed in uncomfortable proximity, where the boundaries between the living and whatever comes after weren't as firmly drawn as they are in most places. The stage was being set for decades of phenomena that would challenge every assumption about how reality works, that would force thousands of people to confront experiences they couldn't explain, that would make the Hotel Monte Vista a legendary location in the annals of American hauntings. The Great Depression hit Flagstaff as it hit everywhere else in America, bringing economic hardship that tested every business's survival. The flow of tourists slowed to a trickle as families struggled just to eat, let alone travel for pleasure. Route 66 still carried traffic, but now it was as likely to be families fleeing the Dust Bowl, heading west toward California and the promise of agricultural work, as it was to be tourists seeking adventure. The Hotel Monte Vista survived this difficult period, but just barely, kept afloat by the loyalty of local investors who couldn't bear to see their community's grand project fail, and by the occasional film crew that still came to the area to take advantage of the spectacular landscapes, bringing brief bursts of business that helped keep the hotel solvent during lean times. Through the Depression years, through World War II, when travel restrictions and rationing limited the hotel's business to essential travelers and military personnel. Through the post-war boom, when Americans rediscovered leisure travel and Route 66 became the main street of America, celebrated in song and story, the Hotel Monte Vista endured. It adapted to changing times. It changed hands as different owners tried their luck at making the property profitable. It was renovated and updated and modified to meet changing tastes and standards. The original mission-style furniture was eventually replaced with more modern pieces. The rooms were updated with newer bathrooms, with televisions as that technology became standard, with the amenities guests came to expect from quality accommodations. The bar evolved with changing drinking trends, from pre-prohibition cocktails to speakeasy-style bootlegging during the dry years when alcohol was officially illegal, but actually widely available to those who knew where to look, to the martini culture of the 1950s and beyond as American drinking habits shifted with cultural changes. But through all these transformations, through all these decades of operation, the fundamental character of the place remained constant. It was still Flagstaff's grand hotel, still the place where locals gathered for special occasions, still the stop for travelers who wanted something with more character than the chain motels that were beginning to sprout along America's highways, offering standardized rooms at standardized prices, but lacking the personality and history that properties like the Monte Vista possessed. And increasingly, as the decades passed, the hotel became known for something else entirely, something its original builders never intended or imagined. The strange occurrences that had been occasional curiosities in the early years became regular phenomena, then became expected, then became part of the hotel's identity in ways that would have shocked and probably dismayed those community investors who'd pooled their resources to build Flagstaff's finest establishment. By the 1970s and 1980s, the Hotel Monte Vista wasn't just accepting its reputation for being haunted, it was embracing it as a unique selling point in an increasingly competitive market. Ghost tours began to include the hotel as a stop, guides bringing groups of tourists to stand outside and hear stories of the phantom bellboy and the woman at the window. Paranormal investigators started requesting permission to spend nights investigating the reported phenomena, bringing equipment and enthusiasm to document what they hoped would be proof of life after death. Guests specifically requested rooms where unusual activity had been reported, hoping for their own supernatural encounter, their own story to tell when they returned home. The hauntings had become part of the hotel's marketing, part of what made it unique in an increasingly homogenized hospitality industry, where one holiday and looked much like another, but the Monte Vista offered something different, something you couldn't find elsewhere. But let's be clear about something important. The Hotel Monte Vista didn't seek out its reputation as a haunted location. The building didn't ask for the phenomena that would make it famous among ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts. What happened to the Monte Vista happened organically, accumulated over decades, built up from hundreds of individual experiences reported by guests and staff who had no reason to lie, who often had every reason to downplay or dismiss what they'd experienced because believing in ghosts challenged their worldview, but who couldn't deny what they'd seen, heard, and felt within those walls. This is what makes the Monte Vista compelling as a case study in alleged hauntings. We're not talking about a location with a single dramatic event in its history that's been turned into ghost story fodder, some famous murder or tragic death that gets embellished with each retelling. We're talking about a working hotel that has simply accumulated too many strange reports from too many different people over too many years to dismiss them all as imagination or hoax or coincidence or any other simple explanation. Something has been happening at the Hotel Monte Vista since its earliest days, and that something has only intensified as the decades have passed, growing stronger rather than fading as old ghost stories usually do. And at the heart of these reports, one of the most persistent and unnerving phenomena that guests and staff describe is the knocking. The knocking that comes from nowhere. The knocking that guests hear in the dead of night, clear and purposeful and undeniably real, yet which has no identifiable source. The knocking that staff members have grown accustomed to over years of employment, that they've learned to acknowledge and accept even as it defies rational explanation. The knocking that might be the hotel itself trying to communicate, or might be something that has taken up residence in the hotel and refuses to leave, making its presence known in the most direct way possible. Let's talk about that knocking and about everything else that makes the Hotel Monte Vista one of the most fascinating, allegedly haunted locations in America, a place where the impossible happens with such regularity that it starts to seem almost routine, where the boundary between what we think we know about reality and what actually occurs in this particular building becomes uncomfortably thin. Section 2. The Phantom Bellboy and the Third Floor. 3,500 words. If you were to ask the staff of the Hotel Monte Vista about their most famous ghost, most would point you toward the third floor and tell you about the Phantom Bellboy. This entity has been part of the hotel's paranormal landscape for so long that he's earned a name among some staff members, though nobody quite agrees on what that name should be. Some call him Jack, others insist his name was Michael, while a few stick with the more generic the Bellboy, as if naming him too specifically would somehow make him more real, more present, more impossible to dismiss as anything other than what he appears to be. The story of the Phantom Bellboy is rooted in tragedy, as so many ghost stories are, though the specific details have become frustratingly murky through decades of retelling and the passage of time. According to the most commonly told version, sometime in the early years of the hotel's operation during the late 1920s or early 1930s, a young bellhop who worked at the Monte Vista died in the building under circumstances that remain vague and disputed. Some versions of the story say he was killed in an accident, perhaps falling down the stairs while carrying heavy luggage for a guest, his neck breaking in the fall. Other versions suggest something more sinister, hinting at violence or foul play, perhaps a robbery gone wrong, or an altercation with a guest or another staff member. Still others propose that he died of natural causes, perhaps a heart condition or an illness like influenza that struck quickly and unexpectedly in an era before modern medicine could have saved him. The lack of concrete details about the bellboy's death is both frustrating for researchers and oddly typical of ghost stories from this era. We want clear, verifiable facts. We want to be able to look up newspaper accounts of the accident or incident that created the haunting to find death certificates and coroner's reports that would give us names and dates and causes. But small tragedies, especially those involving working-class young men in the 1920s and 1930s, often went underreported or unreported entirely in newspapers of the time. A bellhop wasn't a prominent citizen whose death would merit headlines. And hotel management, especially in an era when Monte Vista was struggling to establish itself financially during the Depression years, would have had every incentive to keep any unpleasant incidents quiet, to avoid the kind of negative publicity that could scare away guests in an already competitive market where every paying customer mattered. So we're left with oral tradition, with stories passed down through generations of hotel staff, with accounts that have been burnished and embellished through decades of retelling, but which maintain a core consistency that's difficult to explain away as pure fiction or fabrication. And what those stories consistently tell us is this: a young bellhop died at the Hotel Monte Vista under tragic circumstances, and he never left. His spirit, his consciousness, his presence, whatever you want to call it, remained in the building, continuing to perform the duties he'd been assigned in life, still checking on guests, still walking the halls he'd walked when he was alive, still carrying invisible luggage to rooms that needed service. The phenomena associated with the phantom bellboy began to be reported seriously as early as the 1940s, though it's quite possible that similar experiences occurred earlier and simply weren't recorded or weren't taken seriously enough to be documented. The pattern of manifestations is distinctive and has remained remarkably consistent over the decades, reported by guests who have no knowledge of previous reports, suggesting either a genuine phenomenon or a remarkably consistent pattern of hallucination or misperception, though the latter seems increasingly unlikely given the specificity of the accounts. The most common experience reported by guests staying on the third floor involves hearing a knock at their door, usually late at night or in the early morning hours between 2 and 4 a.m., that window of time that folklore calls the witching hour when the boundary between worlds is supposedly thinnest. Upon opening the door to see who's knocking, guests find no one in the hallway. The corridor is empty, quiet, sometimes eerily so, given that they just heard clear, purposeful knocking that should indicate someone standing right outside their door. Sometimes the knocking will repeat after the guest has checked the hallway and returned to bed, a second or third knock coming minutes later, as if whoever is knocking is playing a game or trying to provoke a response, testing to see if the guest will answer again. But it's not just knocking that guests report. There are the footsteps, the distinctive sound of someone walking purposefully from one end of the third floor corridor to the other, the rhythm of feet on carpet that creates a pattern impossible to mistake for anything but human movement. When guests hear these footsteps passing their doors, they often look out through the peephole or crack the door open to see who's walking past at such an unusual hour. What they find is an empty hallway. The footsteps stop the moment the door opens, as if whatever is creating the sound is aware of being observed and prefers to remain unseen, operating just beyond the threshold of direct confirmation. More intriguingly, more disturbingly for those who experience it, some guests report an even more specific phenomenon that goes beyond mere sounds. They describe opening their door in response to knocking and seeing, just for a moment before he vanishes, a figure standing in the hallway. The descriptions have been consistent enough over the years to be striking, suggesting either a shared hallucination born of suggestion and expectation, or something actually present that multiple independent witnesses have perceived. They describe a young man, appearing to be in his late teens or early 20s, dressed in what looks like a bellhop's uniform from the 1920s or 1930s, dark pants, and a jacket with brass buttons that catch what little light exists in the hallway, sometimes wearing a small cap of the style that service workers wore in that era. He's described as standing near the door as if he's just knocked and is waiting to be acknowledged, waiting for the guest to give him instructions or to tell him what they need. And then, in the blink of an eye, literally in the time it takes for the witness to blink or to call out a question, he simply vanishes. Not fade away gradually like the ghosts in movies, not walk down the hall out of sight, but vanish instantaneously, there one moment, and completely absent the next, as if he stepped through an invisible doorway into somewhere else, somewhere the living can't follow. These sightings aren't constant, aren't something that every third-floor guest experiences, which actually lends them a certain credibility, because if every guest reported seeing the bellboy, it might suggest mass hysteria or hotel staff playing pranks. But the phenomena happen often enough, reported by enough different people who have no contact with each other and no reason to coordinate their stories, that staff have developed protocols for dealing with it. When a guest comes down to the front desk in the middle of the night, confused or frightened, or simply curious about what they've experienced, the response from the night clerk has become almost standardized over the years. "Oh, that's just our bellboy. He's been here longer than any of us. He's harmless, just doing his job, checking on guests to make sure they have everything they need. You can tell him you're fine, and he'll usually move along to check on other rooms." This casual acceptance of the impossible, this normalization of paranormal phenomena as just another aspect of the building's character, is one of the most fascinating aspects of the Monte Vista's culture. The staff doesn't deny what guests experience. They don't try to explain it away as pipes settling or sound from adjacent rooms or any of the usual dismissals that skeptics employ. They acknowledge it, they accept it, they treat it as just another quirk of the building they work in, as ordinary as a creaky floorboard or a window that sticks, just part of the hotel's personality that employees learn to accommodate. Room 305 has been identified as the epicenter of the bellboy phenomena, though reports certainly come from other third-floor rooms as well, suggesting that he makes rounds rather than haunting a single location. Guests staying in 305 report not just the knocking and footsteps, but the feeling of a presence in the room with them, even when they're alone, the sense of being watched by unseen eyes, the uncomfortable awareness that they're sharing space with something they can't see. Some report that the knocking comes not from the hallway door, but from inside the room itself, from the walls, or from the closet, or sometimes from the bathroom. As if the bellboy isn't just passing through the hallway on his eternal rounds, but is actually entering the rooms themselves, materializing inside to check on their occupants with a diligence that death hasn't diminished or disrupted. One particularly detailed and frequently cited account comes from a couple who stayed in room 305 in the early 2000s. They had checked into the hotel late in the evening after a long day of driving, exhausted from travel and eager only to sleep before continuing their journey in the morning. They had gone to bed without incident around 11 p.m. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, they were both awakened simultaneously by a knock at the door, 3 sharp raps that were loud enough to wake them from deep sleep. Assuming it was hotel staff with some kind of urgent message, perhaps a problem with their credit card or a car alarm going off in the parking lot, the husband got up and opened the door quickly. The hallway was empty in both directions, no staff member hurrying away, no other guest visible, nothing to account for the knocking that had definitely, unmistakably occurred. He stepped out into the hall, looked both ways carefully, saw nothing unusual, and went back to bed, mentioning to his wife that it was probably someone knocking on the wrong door by mistake. 15 minutes later, another knock came, more insistent this time, the 3 raps coming harder and faster, as if whoever was knocking was growing impatient. Again, the husband got up. Again, he opened the door immediately, hoping to catch whoever was playing this strange game. And again the hallway was completely empty. But this time he noticed something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The hallway was cold, noticeably colder than their room, despite the fact that the hotel's heating system should have been maintaining a consistent temperature throughout the building. And there was a smell, faint but distinctive, something like old cologne or aftershave mixed with something else he couldn't quite identify, a scent that seemed completely out of place in a modern hotel environment. The husband was now fully awake and becoming increasingly unnerved by what was happening. He mentioned to his wife that something odd was going on, that maybe they should call the front desk to report it or ask if other guests were experiencing similar disturbances. But before they could reach for the phone, a third knock came, and this time both of them clearly heard that it was coming from inside their room, from the area near the closet on the opposite side of the room from the hallway door. Both of them heard it clearly. Both of them were certain of the location, and both of them felt their blood run cold because sound coming from inside a locked room, when they were the only people in it, violated every rule they understood about how reality worked. They turned on all the lights and investigated, checking the closet carefully, looking for any loose fixture or pipe or anything else that might create a knocking noise, any rational explanation that would allow them to dismiss what was happening. They found nothing to account for the sound. The closet was empty except for their hanging clothes. The walls were solid. There was no plumbing behind that section of wall that could cause knocking. They were forced to accept that they had clearly heard knocking coming from a location where nothing physical existed to create such a sound. At this point, thoroughly unsettled and unable to come up with any explanation that made sense, they called the front desk. The night clerk answered on the first ring, his voice suggesting that he'd been expecting the call, that this was not an unusual occurrence on his shift. When they explained what was happening, his response was immediate and practiced, obviously something he'd said many times before. "You're in room 305. You're experiencing our bellboy. He's been part of the hotel for a very long time. He just checks on guests, makes sure they're comfortable and have everything they need. He means no harm whatsoever. You can speak to him directly, tell him you're fine and don't need anything, and he'll usually settle down and let you sleep." The couple, too tired to find the situation funny and too unnerved to appreciate the absurdity in being told to talk to an invisible ghost bellhop, actually followed the clerk's advice. They spoke aloud into the seemingly empty room, saying something to the effect of, "We're fine. Thank you for checking on us. We have everything we need. Please let us sleep now." And remarkably, incredibly, the knocking stopped. The sense of presence that had been making them uncomfortable faded. They slept through the rest of the night without any further disturbances, though both admitted later that it wasn't restful sleep, that they remained partially alert, waiting for more knocking that never came. This kind of interaction between living guests and the purported spirit, this responsive behavior that suggests awareness and intelligence rather than just a recording replaying, is what separates the bellboy phenomenon from what paranormal researchers call residual hauntings. Residual hauntings are typically defined as non-interactive, repeating patterns of energy that play out regardless of whether anyone is there to witness them, like a video loop that plays over and over without awareness of its surroundings. They're thought to be impressions left on the environment by traumatic or repetitive events, psychic recordings that replay under certain conditions. But the bellboy of the Hotel Monte Vista appears to be something different, something that researchers would classify as an intelligent haunting. He appears to be aware of his environment and the people in it. He appears to be capable of responding to direct communication, adjusting his behavior based on what living people say to him. He appears to have some kind of ongoing purpose or mission that he's still trying to fulfill decades after his death, still performing the duties of his position, still checking on guests with the conscientiousness that presumably made him a good employee when he was alive. Whether this represents the literal spirit of a deceased young man, a consciousness that survived death and remains tethered to the location where he worked and died, or something else entirely, Perhaps some kind of psychic imprint that has developed a kind of artificial awareness through decades of interaction with living people remains an open and deeply controversial question. But what's undeniable, what can't be easily dismissed or explained away, is that something is happening on the third floor of the Hotel Monte Vista, something that has been happening consistently for at least 70 or 80 years, something that defies easy explanation and challenges our fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness and death. The phenomena extend beyond just the bellboy's primary activities. Guests on the third floor frequently report light anomalies, seeing what appears to be the beam of a flashlight or the glow of an old-fashioned lantern moving through the hallway, visible as a strip of moving light under their door. Yet when they investigate by opening the door or calling the front desk to ask about staff walking the halls, no light source can be found and no staff members have been on that floor. Electronic devices behave strangely on the third floor in ways that go beyond normal technical malfunctions. Cell phones will drain their batteries impossibly fast, going from full charge to dead in a matter of hours when they should last days. Cameras will malfunction, refusing to take pictures or producing images that are corrupted or show strange artifacts. Recording devices will pick up static or unusual audio that doesn't correspond to any identifiable source, mysterious voices, or sounds that weren't audible during the recording. Temperature fluctuations are another consistent feature of the third floor haunting. Guests and staff report sudden cold spots in the hallway, areas where the temperature drops 10 or 15 degrees for no apparent reason, creating pockets of cold air that you can walk through like walking through an invisible curtain. These cold spots aren't stationary. They move, drifting down the hallway as if something is walking through the space and carrying the cold with it like an aura. HVAC systems have been checked and rechecked by maintenance staff and outside contractors, and there's no mechanical explanation for these temperature variations. The heating and cooling systems are functioning normally, distributing air evenly throughout the floor, yet these cold spots persist, appearing and disappearing according to their own mysterious logic. Then there are the items that go missing and reappear in impossible locations. Guests will set their room key on the nightstand before going to sleep and wait to find it on top of the dresser or inside a drawer they never opened. Glasses or phones or watches will be moved from where they were placed, found later in locations the guest is certain they didn't put them. Sometimes these items appear in places that make no sense whatsoever, like inside a closed drawer that the guest never accessed, or on top of a piece of furniture too high for the item to have been casually placed there without deliberately climbing or using a step stool. Staff members report similar experiences while working on the third floor. Cleaning supplies will be moved from the housekeeping cart while the housekeeper works in a room. Fresh towels will disappear and then reappear neatly folded in rooms that haven't been serviced yet. Vacuum cleaners will be unplugged when the staff member is certain they left them plugged in. These kinds of phenomena, the poltergeist-like movements of objects, the interactive responses to human presence, the intelligent-seeming behavior that adapts to circumstances, all suggest that whatever haunts the third floor of the Hotel Monte Vista possesses some kind of awareness and agency. This isn't just a building with weird acoustics or unusual architecture that creates illusions. This appears to be a genuine presence, an entity or entities that maintain an active relationship with the physical environment and with the people who pass through it, that can affect the material world in measurable ways, even if we can't see or touch the force creating these effects. The most unnerving reports from the third floor, The ones that truly challenge witnesses' sense of reality and leave lasting impressions involve the experiences of staff members who work alone late at night or in the early morning hours when the hotel is mostly quiet and few guests are awake. Housekeepers doing evening turn-down service or working early morning cleaning shift have reported seeing the bellboy figure multiple times over their years of employment. Unlike guests who typically only see him for a moment before he vanishes, staff members sometimes report longer sightings, watching the figure walk the entire length of the hallway or stand outside a room for several seconds as if waiting to be let in or deciding which room to check on next. One longtime housekeeper who worked at the Monte Vista for over 20 years before retiring in the early 2010s gave an interview to a local paranormal researcher where she described her encounters with what she believed was the spirit of the bellboy. She said that in her first few years at the hotel, the sightings frightened her terribly, making her dread her shifts and consider quitting despite needing the job. She would see him walking toward her down the hallway and freeze, not knowing what to do or how to react to something that shouldn't exist, something that violated everything she'd been taught about life and death. Her heart would race, her breath would catch, and she'd stand rooted to the spot until he vanished, which he always did after a few seconds. But over time, over years of repeated encounters, she became accustomed to his presence, came to see him as a benign part of the hotel's character rather than something to fear. She developed a routine of greeting him when she saw him, saying good morning or good evening, as she would to any other staff member, treating him with the respect you'd show a co-worker sharing your shift. And according to her account, he would sometimes respond, not with words but with gestures, a nod of acknowledgement or a slight wave, before vanishing. She came to believe that he was still doing his job, just as she was doing hers, that they were both working the same building just in different states of existence, and that there was no reason for fear or conflict between them. This normalization of the paranormal, this process of becoming comfortable with daily encounters with the impossible, is a common coping mechanism in locations with persistent haunting phenomena. Human beings are remarkably adaptable creatures. We can become accustomed to almost anything if we're exposed to it regularly enough, and if that exposure doesn't involve physical harm or overwhelming psychological distress. The staff of the Hotel Monte Vista have learned over decades to coexist with their ghosts, to accommodate their presence, to work around the odd occurrences, to treat the unexplained as just another aspect of working in a historic building. It's a fascinating study in human adaptability and our ability to expand our definition of normal to include things that violate our fundamental assumptions about how reality works. But let's return to the knocking one more time, because that's where this exploration of the third floor began, and it remains the phenomenon that seems to define the experience of staying on the third floor more than any other. The knocking isn't limited to room 305, though that's where it occurs most frequently and with the most consistency. Guests across the third floor in rooms 301 through 310 report it regularly. That distinctive sound of knuckles rapping on wood, clear and purposeful and impossible to mistake for anything else, coming from their hallway doors or sometimes from inside their rooms, from the bathroom door or the closet door, or even seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. The knocking typically follows a pattern that witnesses describe with remarkable consistency. 3 or 4 sharp raps in quick succession, then silence for a few moments, then a repeat of the same pattern. It's the kind of knocking that suggests someone with business, someone who expects to be answered, not the tentative tapping of someone who's uncertain about disturbing you. Some guests, particularly those who aren't aware of the hotel's haunted reputation before checking in, will answer the knocking multiple times throughout the night, growing increasingly frustrated and eventually frightened as they find no one there again and again. Others, especially those who have read about the Monte Vista's hauntings before their visit, will lie in bed and listen to the knocking without responding, curious but not quite brave enough to engage directly with whatever is creating the sound, content to experience it from the relative safety of their locked room. The truly unsettling experiences, the ones that guests remember and talk about years later, come when the knocking moves around the room, following some invisible logic. It will start at the hallway door, that predictable location that at least makes sense even if no one is there. When the guest doesn't respond or investigates and finds no one, the knocking will move to a different location. It might come from the wall beside the bed next, or from the bathroom door, or from inside the closet, traveling around the room's perimeter as if whatever is knocking is trying different positions to get the guest's attention, searching for the spot where the barrier between its world and ours is thinnest, where communication is most possible, where it can make itself most clearly known. And here's what makes the Hotel Monte Vista's third floor such a compelling case study in alleged paranormal activity. What separates it from countless other locations claiming to be haunted? The sheer consistency of reports across decades and across hundreds of independent witnesses who have no connection to each other and no reason to coordinate their stories. These aren't accounts that have grown in the telling, embellished over years until a small odd occurrence becomes a dramatic ghost story. These are contemporary reports from guests who experienced something strange and reported it immediately, often before they even knew the hotel had a reputation for being haunted, their descriptions matching previous accounts they couldn't have known about. The Bellboy, whether he's the actual spirit of a young man who died in the hotel and remains bound to it, continuing to perform his duties through some mechanism we don't understand, or whether he's something else, some manifestation of collective belief or psychic energy that has taken on a kind of independent existence, has become as much a part of the Hotel Monte Vista as the brick and mortar that holds it together. He's been knocking on doors for 3/4 of a century now, checking on guests, walking his rounds, making his presence known in ways that can't be easily dismissed or explained away. And he shows no signs of stopping, no indication that he's ready to rest or move on to whatever comes next. The third floor remains his domain, his territory, his eternal workplace. And every guest who checks into a room there has the possibility of encountering him, of adding their own story to the decades of accounts that make the Phantom Bellboy one of the most famous ghosts in American paranormal lore. Part 3. Room 210 and the Lonely Woman. If the third floor belongs to the Phantom Bellboy in the mythology of the Hotel Monte Vista, then the second floor has its own resident spirit, one that's both more visible and more deeply tragic in the stories that surround her existence. Room 210 at the Hotel Monte Vista has earned a reputation as perhaps the most actively haunted single room in the entire building, and the entity most often reported there is known among staff and paranormal enthusiasts as the woman in the old-fashioned nightgown, or sometimes more poignantly as the lonely woman or the woman at the window. Names that capture the essential sadness that seems to permeate encounters with her. The phenomena in room 210 differ significantly in character from those on the third floor, where the bellboy goes about his duties. While the bellboy seems to be interacting with guests in what could almost be considered a professional capacity, checking on their comfort and needs, the woman in 210 seems to be lost in her own private drama, caught in an endless loop of waiting and grief, replaying moments from her life or death in ways that occasionally intersect with the experiences of modern guests, but which primarily seem focused inward, on something only she can see or understand, on a sorrow so profound that it has somehow become embedded in the very fabric of the room. The most common and most chilling report from room 210 involves sightings of a female figure sitting in the room's chair, which is typically positioned near the window overlooking San Francisco Street below. Guests who wake in the middle of the night, perhaps disturbed by some sound or simply waking naturally, sometimes see her there, a woman with long dark hair that falls past her shoulders, wearing what appears to be a white or cream-colored nightgown in a style from the 1930s or 1940s, the kind of garment that speaks of an earlier era's notions of modesty and femininity. She's consistently described as sitting very still, almost impossibly still in a way that living humans rarely achieve, looking out the window with an intensity that suggests she's waiting for something or someone, scanning the street below for a specific person or event that never comes. When guests sit up in bed or reach for a lamp to turn on a light, startled by the realization that someone appears to be in their room, the figure vanishes, usually accompanied by a noticeable and sudden drop in temperature that leaves the room feeling cold and empty in a way that goes beyond mere physical temperature. It's a coldness that seems to penetrate, that feels like absence more than presence, like something warm and alive has been there and is now gone, leaving behind a void that the normal air rushes in to fill. Unlike the bellboy, who seems at least somewhat aware of the living people around him and capable of responding to their presence in meaningful ways, the woman in 210 rarely acknowledges witnesses to her manifestation. She appears completely absorbed in her own experience, gazing out the window with an expression that observers consistently describe as heartbreakingly sad or melancholy, lost in grief or longing so profound that it transcends death itself. She doesn't move much during the brief moments before she disappears. She doesn't turn to look at the guest who's seeing her. She doesn't react to lights being turned on or to voices calling out questions. She simply sits in that chair by the window, waiting and watching, and then she's gone as if she never existed, leaving behind only the cold air and the unsettled feeling that witnesses something they shouldn't have been able to see. The most persistent legend surrounding room 210, the story that's been told and retold so many times that it's become difficult to separate fact from embellishment, suggests that this woman was a guest at the hotel sometime during the 1940s. Possibly during World War II, when the world was torn apart by conflict and millions of people waited desperately for news of loved ones who were far away fighting. One version of the story claims she was waiting for a lover or a husband who never returned from the war, that she stayed in room 210 for weeks or months, watching the street below for his arrival, growing more despondent as days turned to weeks and weeks to months without word, until finally, devastated by grief and unable to bear the waiting any longer, she took her own life in that room, swallowing pills or cutting her wrists or hanging herself from some fixture that no longer exists. Another version of the legend suggests a darker scenario, that she was murdered in the room by a jealous partner who couldn't bear the thought of her being with someone else, her death covered up or misreported as a suicide or accident by authorities who either didn't investigate carefully enough or who were encouraged to reach certain conclusions by people with influence and resources. Still another variation proposes that she died of natural causes, perhaps a heart attack or a cerebral aneurysm, but that her death occurred while she was in a state of intense emotional distress, waiting for news that never came, for a person who never arrived, and that this emotional state at the moment of death somehow imprinted itself on the room, creating the haunting that persists to this day. As with so many aspects of the Monte Vista's haunted history, the historical documentation is frustratingly sparse and incomplete. Hotel records from the 1940s don't survive in complete form, and even if they did, they likely wouldn't include details about deaths on the premises, since such information would have been carefully suppressed by management, both to avoid the kind of negative publicity that could hurt business and to respect the privacy of families dealing with tragedy in an era when such matters were considered deeply personal and not for public consumption. Death certificates from that era do exist in county archives, but without a specific name or date to search for, without even confirmation that a death actually occurred in room 210, rather than this being merely a legend without basis in fact, finding documentation becomes nearly impossible, a needle in a historical haystack. What we have instead of verifiable records are the accumulated experiences of guests who've stayed in room 210 over the past several decades. Reports that show enough consistency and specificity to suggest that something genuinely unusual happens in that room with remarkable regularity, something that goes beyond suggestion or imagination. Beyond the sightings of the woman herself, which are dramatic but relatively rare, guests report a wide range of phenomena that seem connected to her presence and that occur much more frequently, creating an atmosphere in the room that many find oppressive or disturbing. The most common and widely reported experience is an overwhelming sense of sadness that pervades room 210, a feeling that seems to hang in the air like humidity, thick and inescapable. Guests who are entirely happy and well-adjusted in their normal lives, people without depression or anxiety disorders, people who checked into the hotel in good spirits, report feeling inexplicably melancholy when they're in that room. Some describe it as a physical weight on their chest, a heaviness that makes it difficult to feel any joy or lightness, as if gravity itself has increased and is pulling down not just their bodies but their spirits as well. Others report sudden waves of grief that seem to come from nowhere and for no reason, moments where they find themselves on the verge of tears or actually crying without understanding why, mourning losses they haven't experienced, feeling sorrows that aren't their own. This emotional phenomenon is so consistent, reported by so many different guests across so many years, that some people who are particularly sensitive to such atmospheric influences, people who identify as empaths, or who simply know they're affected by the emotional energy of spaces, specifically request not to be placed in room 210 even if they're curious about the hotel's hauntings in general. They recognize that being exposed to that level of residual grief, even for a single night, could leave them feeling emotionally drained or disturbed for days afterward. Then there are the auditory phenomena that make room 210 particularly unnerving for guests trying to sleep. People report hearing the sound of crying, a woman's soft weeping that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, emanating from the walls or from the bathroom or sometimes from no identifiable direction at all, surrounding the listener with grief. The crying is never loud or theatrical, not the wailing of someone seeking attention or trying to disturb others. It's private grief overheard, the sound of someone who believes she's alone and unobserved in her sorrow, letting out pain that can't be contained any longer. It's intimate and uncomfortable in the way that overhearing someone's private pain always is, making witnesses feel like intruders in a moment that wasn't meant to be shared. When guests try to locate the precise source of the crying, following the sound to pinpoint where it's coming from, it stops immediately, leaving them standing in silence, wondering if they really heard it at all, or if their imagination supplied the sound to match the oppressive sadness they're feeling in the room. This pattern of the phenomenon ceasing when directly investigated is frustratingly common in paranormal reports and is one of the reasons why skeptics can maintain their skepticism, arguing that if the crying were real, it would continue regardless of investigation, that its cessation when pursued suggests it was never real in the first place, but was always a product of imagination or misperception. The window, that spot where the woman is most often seen sitting and gazing out at the street below, appears to be a particular focal point for the phenomena in room 210. Multiple guests have reported that the curtains move in that room when there's absolutely no breeze, no air conditioning vent nearby that could cause the movement, no open window allowing outside air to enter. The curtains will sway gently and purposefully, as if someone is standing behind them looking out the window, as if invisible hands are moving the fabric aside to get a better view of the street, and then they'll fall still again. Sometimes guests report seeing the shadow of a figure projected onto the closed curtains by the light from outside, a silhouette that clearly suggests someone standing at the window in profile, but when they investigate by opening the curtains or looking behind them, no one and nothing is there that could create such a shadow. One particularly striking and frequently shared account that has become almost legendary among Monte Vista ghost story collections comes from a woman who stayed in room 210 in the late 1990s, before the internet made it easy to research hotel hauntings in advance. She had checked in late at night after a long, exhausting drive, wanting only to sleep before continuing her journey in the morning. She had gone straight to bed without much awareness of her surroundings. She woke around 3 a.m., needing to use the bathroom, and as she got up, she noticed that the curtains were open, which struck her as odd because she had a clear memory of closing them before going to sleep, not wanting to wake to bright morning sunlight in her eyes. She got up to close the curtains and glanced at the window glass as she reached for the fabric. There in the reflection, clear and detailed enough to make out specific features, she saw the figure of a woman standing directly behind her. The figure was close enough that the guest should have been able to feel the presence, close enough to touch if she'd reached back. The woman in the reflection wore a white nightgown, had long dark hair, and was looking not at the guest, but past her, out the window at the empty street below. The image was so clear, so detailed, so realistic that for a moment the guest's mind tried to process it as a real person, tried to come up with some explanation for why another woman would be standing in her locked hotel room in the middle of the night. But when she spun around to confront this intruder, her heart pounding with the adrenaline surge of fear and alarm, the room was empty. There was no one behind her. There was no one anywhere in the room except herself. But the figure had been there in the reflection, as clear as the guest's own reflection, as solid-looking as anything physical. And yet it existed only in the mirror surface of the window, not in the physical space of the room itself, a paradox that violated everything the guest thought she knew about how reflection and reality worked. This guest did something that many people wouldn't have the courage or presence of mind to do in such a moment. Instead of fleeing the room or calling the front desk in panic, she spoke directly to the reflection, to the figure that shouldn't exist. She said something like, "I can see you. I know you're here somehow. I don't understand this, but it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you, and I hope you won't hurt me." And according to her detailed account, the figure in the reflection moved in response to these words, turning slightly as if acknowledging that it had been seen and addressed, and then it faded away gradually rather than vanishing instantly as the woman usually does, dissolving slowly like mist in morning sun until only the guest's own reflection remained in the window. The guest reported feeling in that moment not fear, but profound compassion and sadness for whatever she was seeing, a recognition that this wasn't a threatening presence, but a suffering one, a soul or spirit or fragment of consciousness trapped in endless grief and longing. The experience left her deeply shaken, but also strangely moved, touched by the tragedy of whatever had happened in that room to create such persistent sorrow. She checked out the next morning and made a point of speaking to the front desk staff about her experience, wanting to know if others had reported similar things, needing some kind of validation that what she'd experienced was real and not a product of exhaustion or imagination. The clerk she spoke with, a longtime employee who had heard countless such reports over the years, nodded knowingly and sympathetically and said, "You met the woman in 210. She's always there, always waiting at that window. Nobody knows for certain who she's waiting for or what happened to her, but she never seems to give up hope that whoever she's expecting will arrive. A lot of guests see her or feel her presence. You're not imagining it, and you're not alone in experiencing it." This casual matter of fact acceptance of the impossible, this willingness to acknowledge and validate what guests experience rather than dismissing it, is characteristic of how the Monte Vista staff has learned to deal with the ongoing phenomena in their building. Room 210 has another distinctive and particularly strange feature that guests report with surprising frequency. Personal items in the room will be moved or rearranged overnight, and not just shifted slightly, but deliberately reorganized in ways that suggest intention and purpose. Jewelry that a guest has laid out on a nightstand before sleeping will be found in the morning arranged in different patterns, sorted by color or size or type in ways the guest definitely didn't do. Clothing that was hung randomly in the closet will be rearranged by color or style, organized with a fastidiousness that suggests someone spent considerable time on the task. Books or magazines left scattered on the table will be found stacked in neat piles, sometimes arranged by size. Toiletries in the bathroom will be lined up with labels facing forward, organized by type. It's as if the woman in the room is tidying up, imposing order on the space, perhaps recreating routines from her own life when she stayed in the hotel or lived in an era when such domestic attention to detail was expected of women. Some guests find this rearranging helpful and even charming in a strange way, appreciating the organization even if they're unsettled by how it occurred. Others find it deeply invasive and disturbing, the idea that something invisible was handling their personal belongings while they slept, making them feel violated and unsafe. Some guests report an even stranger variation of this phenomenon, waking to find their suitcases unpacked and their belongings put away in drawers in the closet, as if by an attentive hotel maid, even though housekeeping hasn't been in the room and the guests never unpacked themselves. Others report the opposite experience, finding their carefully packed suitcases unpacked and the contents scattered around the room as if someone was frantically searching for something specific, pulling out items and discarding them until finding what they sought or giving up in frustration. These physical manifestations, the movement and reorganization of objects, suggest a level of interaction with the material world that goes beyond simple apparitions or sounds, indicating that whatever haunts room 210 has the ability to affect physical matter in observable, measurable ways. Temperature anomalies in room 210 are extreme, dramatic, and exceptionally well documented by multiple independent witnesses. Guests consistently report that one specific area of the room, typically the zone near the window where the woman is most often seen, remains noticeably and uncomfortably colder than the rest of the space, sometimes by 10 or 15 degrees. The hotel's HVAC system has been checked and rechecked by maintenance staff and by outside contractors brought in specifically to find an explanation for these temperature variations, and there's no mechanical reason for this cold spot to exist. The heating and cooling systems are functioning normally and should be distributing air evenly throughout the room. Yet this cold spot persists regardless of whether the heating or air conditioning is running, regardless of the outside temperature or weather conditions, regardless of any other environmental factors that engineers can identify. Some guests report that this cold spot isn't entirely stationary, but moves slightly over the course of the night, as if it's connected to whatever presence creates it, following some invisible path around the room, or hovering near the window where the woman watches and waits. The cold isn't just a temperature drop, but seems to carry with it that same sense of sadness and loss that pervades the room, as if the coldness is emotional as much as physical, as if grief itself has a temperature, and that temperature is significantly below what living humans can comfortably tolerate. One of the most unsettling and frequently reported experiences from room 210, the kind of encounter that leaves guests genuinely frightened rather than just curious or intrigued, involves waking to find indentations on the bed beside them, clear depressions in the mattress, as if someone is sitting or lying there, someone with enough mass and weight to compress the springs and shift the bedding. The mattress is visibly compressed, the blankets are disturbed and pushed down, but no one visible is creating these impressions. Some guests report actually feeling the bed move as if someone is getting in or out of it, feeling the shift in weight distribution and the movement of the mattress springs, but seeing nothing at all that would account for these sensations. A few particularly brave or perhaps foolhardy guests have reported reaching out to touch the area where the impression appears, extending a hand toward the indentation to see if they can feel anything there. What they describe is chilling. They report feeling resistance, as if they're touching something solid that they can't see, something that has mass and presence, even if it lacks visibility. They describe it as feeling like touching a person, feeling the slight give of flesh and body, even though their eyes insist there's nothing there, creating a cognitive dissonance so profound that some guests pull their hands back immediately and leave the room, unable to process what they're experiencing, unwilling to continue testing the boundaries of this impossible interaction. These tactile phenomena, these experiences of physically feeling things that can't be seen, are particularly significant in paranormal research because they're much harder to dismiss as misperception or imagination than visual or auditory phenomena. Seeing something in low light conditions can be explained by shadows or tricks of the eye, by the way our visual system tries to find patterns and familiar shapes in ambiguous visual data. Hearing something can be explained by the building's acoustics, by sounds carrying from other rooms or from outside, by the way our brains try to interpret random noises as meaningful sounds. But feeling the physical movement of a mattress, feeling resistance when touching empty air where an indentation suggests someone or something is present, these are experiences that suggest something with measurable physical effects is actually present in the room, interacting with the material world in ways that produce observable results. The emotional experiences that guests report from room 210 extend far beyond the general sense of sadness that pervades the space. Some guests describe dreaming unusually vivid and emotionally intense dreams when they sleep in that room. Dreams that feel less like normal dreams and more like memories of events they never personally experienced. Scenes from another time and place that play out with a realism and emotional impact that normal dreams rarely achieve. Multiple guests have reported variations of the same basic dream scenario. Standing at a train station or a dock, waiting for someone to arrive, watching crowds of people disembark from trains or ships, scanning faces desperately looking for one specific person, and then experiencing the growing realization and crushing disappointment that the person they're waiting for isn't coming, isn't on this train or this ship, may never be coming at all. The grief and abandonment in these dreams is so profound that it wakes guests from sleep, leaving them emotionally distraught despite knowing intellectually that they were just dreaming about a situation that has nothing to do with their actual lives. The striking similarity of these dreams across different guests who couldn't have known about each other's experiences suggests that if they're not simply coincidental, they might represent some kind of shared access to residual emotional energy in the room. Perhaps guests are somehow tapping into fragments of feelings and memories associated with whoever died in room 210, experiencing echoes of her emotional state in ways that manifest as dreams that feel more real than typical sleep narratives. Some paranormal researchers theorize that intense emotions, particularly those associated with traumatic events like death or profound loss, can somehow impress themselves on physical spaces, creating a kind of psychic recording that sensitive individuals or people in certain mental states like sleep can perceive and experience as if the emotions were their own. This theory of residual hauntings or place memory suggests that what guests in room 210 are experiencing isn't necessarily a conscious spirit or ghost in the traditional sense of a surviving personality that can think and act independently, but rather an echo of past events, a replay of emotional energy that continues to manifest because it was so powerful at the time it was created, so overwhelming that it literally changed the space where it occurred. This would explain why the woman at the window seems unaware of witnesses, why she doesn't interact with guests, why she appears to be replaying the same scenario of waiting and watching over and over without variation or development. But other aspects of the phenomena in room 210 don't fit neatly into this residual haunting model and suggest that something more complex might be happening. The woman occasionally seems to respond to the emotional states of guests, appearing more frequently or more clearly to people who are themselves experiencing grief or loss, as if she's drawn to similar emotional vibrations, or as if their sadness somehow makes them more perceptive to her presence. The rearrangement of guests' belongings suggests intentional action and a kind of awareness of the current state of the room that residual energy shouldn't possess. The physical sensations of the bed moving or of touching something solid but invisible suggest a presence that can interact with the material world in real time rather than simply replaying recorded impressions from the past. This has led some paranormal researchers and investigators to propose that room 210 might contain both types of haunting phenomena, both residual and intelligent, that there's both an emotional imprint left from whatever tragic event occurred there decades ago, and also an actual conscious presence, perhaps the spirit of the woman who died, that remains aware and at least partially active in the space, capable of perceiving current events and occasionally interacting with them. This dual haunting theory could potentially explain the full range of phenomena reported. The passive replaying of grief and waiting combined with the active rearranging of objects and the occasional responsive behavior that suggests awareness of living guests. The hotel management has never attempted to cleanse or exorcise room 210, never brought in priests or psychics or paranormal investigators to try to release whatever haunts that space and help it move on to whatever comes next. The phenomena have become part of the hotel's character, part of what makes it unique and interesting in a competitive hospitality market where uniqueness and character are valuable commodities. Some guests specifically request room 210 because they want to have a paranormal experience, because they hope to see the woman at the window or feel her presence, because they want their own ghost story to tell. The room is often booked months in advance by ghost hunters, paranormal enthusiasts, and simply by people who are curious about the unexplained and want to test their own reactions to potentially encountering something that shouldn't exist. The hotel staff does have a policy of warning guests about the room's reputation before assigning them to 210, ensuring that no one is surprised or upset by what they might experience there, giving people the opportunity to request a different room if they're not comfortable with the possibility of paranormal activity. This approach balances the commercial value of the haunted room with ethical concerns about exposing unwitting guests to potentially disturbing experiences, allowing the hotel to cater to both those who seek such encounters and those who prefer to avoid them. What we can say with confidence after reviewing decades of accumulated reports is that room 210 has been the site of consistent, unusual phenomena for at least 50 or 60 years, that the experiences reported by guests show remarkable similarity despite the witnesses having no contact with each other and no opportunity to coordinate their accounts, and that whatever causes these phenomena shows absolutely no signs of diminishing or changing over time. The woman at the window continues to wait for someone who never comes, continues to grieve losses that time hasn't healed, continues to make her presence known to the living guests who temporarily share her space, whether through visible appearances or through the overwhelming sadness that soaks into anyone who spends time in that room. Whether she's truly the spirit of a woman who died in room 210 in the 1940s, her consciousness somehow persisting after death and bound to the location of her greatest sorrow, or whether she's something else entirely, some complex manifestation of residual emotional energy combined with living guests' expectations and psychic sensitivity. She has become as permanent and defining a feature of room 210 as the furniture and fixtures. She's part of the room's identity now, a tragic presence that adds depth and mystery to what would otherwise be just another hotel room. A reminder that some sorrows are so profound they transcend the boundaries we usually assume exist between life and death, between past and present, between what is and what can no longer be. Part 4. The Basement Bar, where spirits gather in more ways than one. Every haunted hotel has its collection of ghost stories distributed across different floors and rooms, but the Hotel Monte Vista has the particular distinction of having paranormal phenomena that appear to appreciate the social atmosphere of its ground floor bar. The lounge, which has operated under various names over the hotel's nearly century-long history, but is currently known as the Monte Vista Cocktail Lounge, has its own unique collection of phenomena that differ markedly in character and feel from what happens in the guest rooms upstairs. while the upper floors seem to house the spirits of former guests and employees caught in personal dramas of loss and duty. The bar area appears to attract something altogether different, entities that seem drawn to the energy of social gathering, to the noise and laughter and clinking of glasses, to the timeless human ritual of people coming together to drink and talk and temporarily forget their troubles. The bar itself is a beautiful piece of architectural preservation, retaining much of its original character and atmosphere despite necessary renovations and updates over the decades. Dark wood paneling covers the walls, absorbing light and creating an intimate dimness even during the day. The lighting fixtures are deliberately kept low, creating pools of warm light at tables and along the bar, while leaving corners in atmospheric shadow. A long mahogany bar, its surface worn smooth by decades of elbows and spilled drinks and the constant wiping of bar rags, dominates one wall. Behind it, shelves of bottles create a colorful backdrop, glass catching and reflecting the limited light. Booths line the opposite wall, offering semi-private spaces for conversations that range from business deals to romantic encounters to the unburdening of troubles to sympathetic strangers or patient bartenders. It's the kind of bar that every small city used to have before chain restaurants and corporate ownership homogenized American drinking culture, a place that serves as a genuine social crossroads where locals and travelers mix naturally, where the various economic classes of society meet on relatively equal footing because alcohol has that peculiar democratizing effect of making everyone slightly more honest and slightly less concerned with maintaining social hierarchies. You might find a timber executive and a construction worker sitting next to each other at the bar, discovering they have more in common than they'd have imagined. Their conversation lubricated by whiskey and the shared humanity that emerges when formal roles are temporarily set aside. The paranormal phenomena in the bar area began to be reported and taken seriously starting in the 1960s and 1970s as American culture became more open to discussing such things. Though it's quite likely that earlier staff members and regular patrons experienced similar occurrences, but either didn't report them out of fear of ridicule or had their reports dismissed as alcohol-fueled imagination. The most consistent and frequently reported manifestation involves the sounds of activity in the bar during hours when it's closed and supposedly empty. Staff members opening the bar in the morning or closing it late at night regularly report hearing what sounds like a busy evening in progress. Conversations and laughter, the distinctive clink of glass on glass, the scrape of chair legs on the floor, all the ambient noise of a crowded bar full of patrons enjoying themselves, coming clearly from the bar area when the staff members know with absolute certainty that the space is empty and locked. When they investigate these sounds, entering the bar to see who or what is creating the noise, the sounds stop immediately and completely, and the bar is as quiet and deserted as it should be. Nothing out of place, no evidence that anyone has been there. These auditory phenomena have become so routine, so expected, that they become part of the normal opening and closing procedures for bar staff. A bartender unlocking the door in the morning might call out, "Good morning, everyone," to the seemingly empty room and hear a momentary surge of activity, voices, and movement, before silence falls again, as if the greeting has been acknowledged and the invisible patrons have settled down. A staff member locking up at night might say, "Time to go home now. Last call was an hour ago," and feel rather than see a sense of movement, as if invisible patrons are gathering their things and reluctantly heading for exits that lead somewhere the living can't follow. But the phenomena extend far beyond just sounds that could potentially be explained by acoustics or imagination. Bartenders consistently report physical objects moving on their own without any visible cause, in ways that violate basic physics as we understand it. Glasses will shift position on shelves when no one is near them, and when there's no vibration or movement that could cause them to slide. Bottles will rotate on shelves so that their labels face forward in neat, organized rows when the bartender is certain they were arranged differently just moments before. Ice appears in the ice bucket when the bartender knows it should be empty because they emptied it themselves at closing the previous night. Clean glasses become wet and need to be dried again, even though no one has touched them or used them, as if they've been picked up and rinsed by invisible hands attending to invisible customers. One longtime bartender who worked at the Monte Vista for over 15 years before eventually moving to another state described in an interview how he developed a nightly ritual to accommodate the bar's unseen inhabitants. He would finish his closing procedures, wiping down the bar counter until it gleamed, carefully arranging the glassware and bottles in precise positions, preparing everything meticulously for the next day's business. He would turn off most of the lights, leaving just the minimum security lighting that was required, and before leaving he would address the seemingly empty bar directly. "I'm leaving now. You folks take care of the place, and please don't make too much of a mess for the morning shift." And consistently, reliably, he would hear what sounded like a response, a murmur of voices too indistinct to make out individual words, but clearly indicating acknowledgement and agreement, as if the invisible patrons appreciated his courtesy in addressing them and were promising to behave reasonably well in his absence. He said it never frightened him after the first few times, that it came to feel more like the bar's actual living patrons bidding him good night than anything threatening or unsettling. He described it as comforting in a strange way, the sense that the bar was never truly empty, that the space was always occupied by presences who appreciated the atmosphere and wanted to be there even if they no longer had physical bodies that could hold physical drinks. There are also visual sightings in and around the bar area, though these are significantly less frequent than the auditory phenomena and the movement of objects. Staff members and occasional late-night patrons who linger after most others have left report seeing figures sitting at the bar occupying the booths, figures that appear solid and realistic and completely normal until the witness looks away for a moment and then back, at which point the figures have vanished completely as if they never existed. The descriptions of these apparitions vary considerably. Some are described as men dressed in clothing from the 1930s or 1940s, wearing suits and fedoras in styles that marked that era, looking like they've stepped out of a classic film noir. Others are described as couples dressed in clothing from various different decades, sitting close together in the intimate posture of romantic partners deep in private conversation. A few witnesses report seeing what appears to be a small party in progress. Multiple figures gathered around the bar or occupying several booths simultaneously, engaged in animated discussion or celebration, visible for just a moment before vanishing completely and leaving no trace of their presence. One of the most detailed and specific sightings was reported by a hotel guest who had stayed late in the bar, nursing a final drink well after midnight when most other patrons had departed for the night. He was sitting at the bar itself, tired from a long day of travel and not particularly attentive to his surroundings, lost in his own thoughts and the pleasant numbness that comes from slowly sipping whiskey. He gradually became aware that someone was sitting a few stools down from him further along the bar. At first, he didn't think much of it, assuming it was another patron or perhaps a local who preferred vintage clothing, someone interesting but not impossible or supernatural. But something made him look more carefully, some instinct that told him something wasn't quite right about this other figure. As he focused his attention, he realized with growing shock that he could see through the person, could see the bottles on the back shelf visible through what should have been the solid torso of the man in the old-fashioned suit. The figure was semi-transparent, present but not entirely solid, existing in a state somewhere between visible and invisible. Rather than panic or flee, this guest did something remarkable and unexpected. He raised his own glass in a toast toward the figure, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect, a silent communication that said, "I see you, I don't understand what you are, but I mean you no harm, and I honor your presence in this space." According to his account, which he reported to hotel staff before checking out the next day, the figure turned toward him in response to this gesture, made direct eye contact for a brief moment, and raised its own glass in return, though the glass itself was barely visible, more suggested than clearly seen, as if it was an echo or memory of a glass rather than a physical object. They held the mutual toast for a few seconds, two drinkers acknowledging each other across the boundary between life and death, and then the figure simply faded away gradually, dissolving like smoke dissipating in a breeze rather than vanishing instantly. The guest finished his drink with hands that trembled slightly, left an unusually generous tip, and mentioned the encounter casually to the night clerk as he headed to his room, trying to sound unconcerned even though his voice betrayed his unsettled emotional state. The clerk's response was practiced and matter-of-fact. "Yeah, we get that sometimes in the bar. The place has a few regulars who never really left after last call became permanent for them. Consider yourself lucky, most people never get to see them that clearly." The basement level of the hotel, which connects to the bar area through a door behind the bar and a stairway that staff use for accessing storage and bringing up supplies, has its own distinct and considerably darker collection of phenomena that suggest not all the presences in the building are as benign as the phantom drinkers in the lounge. Staff members report feeling profoundly uncomfortable in the basement, experiencing an intense sense of being watched or followed when they're down there for legitimate work purposes like retrieving kegs or checking inventory. The lighting in the basement is poor, which certainly doesn't help matters, but even in areas that are adequately lit, even when they're carrying flashlights that should dispel shadows and provide visibility, people report a creeping unease, a feeling that they're not alone even when they know rationally that they should be, that something is present in the basement that doesn't want them there and is making its displeasure known through this oppressive atmosphere. There are multiple reports from various staff members over the years of shadow figures in the basement, darker patches of darkness that seem to have mass and presence despite being essentially an absence of light, that appear to move independently of any light source that could logically create moving shadows. These shadow figures are usually glimpsed in peripheral vision, appearing at the edge of what the witness can see, and they disappear when the witness tries to look at them directly, creating a frustrating game of almost seeing something significant but never being able to focus on it clearly enough to determine what it actually is. Some staff members report that these shadows seem to follow them as they move through the basement space, maintaining a constant distance of 10 or 15 feet, neither approaching closer nor retreating further, but simply keeping pace as if observing or monitoring the living person's activities. One particularly unsettling report that has been corroborated by multiple staff members over the years involves a specific storage room in the basement where kegs and bar supplies are kept. This room has developed such a reputation for oppressive atmosphere that some employees refuse to enter it alone under any circumstances, insisting that another staff member accompany them, even for quick tasks that logically only require one person. They describe the atmosphere in that storage room as physically difficult to breathe through, as if the air itself is heavier than normal, pressing down on their chests and making each breath require conscious effort. Some report dizziness or nausea when they spend more than a few minutes in that space. Physical symptoms that resolve immediately once they leave the room, suggesting that whatever creates the uncomfortable atmosphere is specific to that location. Others report hearing voices in that storage room. Not the general murmur of conversation that characterizes the bar area above, but distinct words and phrases spoken in tones that range from conversational to angry to pleading, sounds that they can almost but not quite make out clearly enough to understand. It's as if there are conversations happening just below the threshold of clear hearing, dialogues taking place in frequencies or volumes that human ears can barely detect, maddeningly close to comprehensible, but never quite resolving into anything the listener can definitely understand or report accurately. The phenomena in the bar and basement areas seem fundamentally different in character from those in the guest rooms on the upper floors. While the upper floors feel personal and specific, connected to individual stories and identities like the bellboy still performing his duties or the woman waiting forever at her window, the bar area feels more collective and generalized, more like a gathering place that attracts multiple entities rather than being haunted by one or two specific ghosts. It's haunted not by personal tragedy, but by the accumulated energy of decades of social gathering, by all those nights of conversation and laughter and argument and romance and confession that have filled that space since 1927, as if the building has absorbed all that human connection and interaction and occasionally replays it or allows it to bleed through into present awareness. Some paranormal researchers describe this type of phenomenon as place memory or environmental recording, suggesting that spaces can somehow retain impressions of strong or frequently repeated events and occasionally replay those impressions under conditions we don't fully understand, similar to how a recording captures sound and can play it back later. This theory would explain why the bar phenomena feel less personal and interactive than the manifestations upstairs, why the sounds of conversation and laughter don't seem directed at anyone in particular, why the figures that are occasionally seen don't interact meaningfully with living witnesses beyond brief acknowledgments. If the bar isn't haunted by specific individual spirits, so much as it's haunted by the accumulated energy and atmosphere of thousands of nights of human social activity, then what witnesses are experiencing is more like a recording replaying than actual ghosts engaging with the present. But as with so many aspects of the Monte Vista's hauntings, there are experiences that don't fit neatly into simple explanatory categories, and that suggest something more complex and interactive than simple recorded energy. Bartenders report having actual conversations with customers who seem perfectly normal and solid, engaging in ordinary small talk or responding to questions about what they'd like to drink, only to turn away for a moment to prepare the drink or help another customer and find that the person has vanished without paying their tab, without leaving through any of the visible exits, simply gone as if they were never physically present. These encounters are rare enough that they stand out, but common enough over the decades to form a pattern, suggesting that something capable of complex interaction and mimicry of normal human behavior sometimes manifests in the bar. The bar also experiences frequent poltergeist-type phenomena, the movement and disappearance of objects followed by their reappearance in impossible or unlikely locations. Bartenders lose track of bottle openers or bar spoons, essential tools they use constantly throughout their shifts, only to find them hours later in places they absolutely couldn't have ended up through any normal means. Inside the ice machine, where they would have been noticed immediately if they'd been there earlier, on high shelves that no one could have reached without a ladder, in locked storage areas that hadn't been opened. Money occasionally disappears from the cash register and is later found neatly stacked in the basement storage area, as if someone has taken it for safekeeping or simply to prove they can move things around. Cleaning supplies are relocated from their usual storage spots to bizarre, unlikely places, like inside the piano that sits in one corner of the bar that would have to be opened to place items inside it. These object movement phenomena suggest a playful intelligence rather than anything actively malicious, as if someone or something is playing pranks on the staff, testing their reactions, perhaps trying to get attention, or simply amusing themselves at the living world's expense by creating small mysteries and confusions. Some staff members have responded to this apparent playfulness by leaving small offerings in the bar area. A shot of whiskey poured and left on the back bar overnight. A cigarette left in an ashtray, even though smoking is no longer permitted inside the building. Small acknowledgments of the presence they sense around them, and attempts to maintain a cordial relationship with whatever shares their workspace. Whether the bar is haunted by the spirits of former patrons who loved the place so much they couldn't bear to leave it, by employees who spent so much of their lives working there that they remained after death, by some form of recorded energy that preserves and occasionally replays the atmosphere of busy nights, or by some combination of all these possibilities. It's clear that the Monte Vista Cocktail Lounge is far more than just a place to get a drink. It's a gathering place that transcends the usual boundaries between past and present, between the living and whatever comes after, a space where the veil seems particularly thin and where those who pay attention might catch glimpses of a party that's been going on for decades and shows no signs of ending anytime soon. Part 5. Other Rooms, Other Stories. The hotel's full spectrum of hauntings. While rooms 210 and 305 have earned the most fame and generate the majority of paranormal reports at the Hotel Monte Vista, they're far from the only locations in the building where strange things happen with unsettling regularity. Almost every floor has its own collection of odd occurrences, its own stories whispered among staff members and shared in online forums by guests who experienced something they couldn't explain. The hotel is layered with phenomena, some dramatic and some subtle, creating an atmosphere where the unusual becomes almost routine and where any given night might produce an encounter with something that challenges everything we think we know about reality. Room 220, located on the second floor near the more famous Room 210, has its own distinct manifestation that guests report with surprising frequency. Unlike the melancholy woman at the window who haunts 210, the presence in 220 seems to be that of a man, and his behavior suggests not grief, but confusion, as if he's lost and trying to find his way to somewhere he needs to be, but can never quite locate. Guests in 220 report hearing pacing, the sound of someone walking back and forth across the room for hours, as if trying to decide what to do or where to go. The pacing follows a consistent pattern. Footsteps from the door to the window, pause, then back to the door, pause, then the cycle repeats endlessly. When guests turn on lights or call out asking if someone is there. The pacing stops immediately, but it often resumes once the lights are turned off again and the guest tries to return to sleep. More disturbingly, some guests in room 220 report waking to find a male figure standing at the foot of their bed, just standing there motionless, as if watching them sleep or waiting for them to wake. The figure is described as wearing what looks like 1950s-era clothing, a simple shirt and pants, and his expression is described as confused or concerned rather than threatening. When witnesses sit up or react with alarm, the figure vanishes instantly, but the encounter leaves guests deeply unsettled, the idea of being watched while sleeping violating one of our most basic assumptions about privacy and safety. Some psychics and sensitives who have visited the hotel have suggested that this presence is someone who died in the room suddenly and unexpectedly, perhaps from a heart attack or stroke, and remains confused about his own death, not understanding why he can't leave the room or why other people can't seem to see or hear him properly. Room 306, on the third floor but far enough from the Bellboy's primary haunt of 305 to seem like separate territory, has phenomena that focus on the bathroom. Multiple guests have reported that the bathroom faucet turns itself on during the night, producing first a trickle and then a full stream of water that continues until someone physically turns it off. Some wake to find the bathroom flooded, water overflowing the sink and spreading across the floor, even though they distinctly remember turning everything off before going to bed. The shower has been reported to turn on by itself as well, and some guests claim to see the silhouette of a person visible through the shower curtain, as if someone is standing in the shower, though investigation reveals the shower stall to be empty. Hotel maintenance has checked the plumbing in room 306 exhaustively, replacing fixtures multiple times, but the phenomena continue regardless of new hardware. Some guests report hearing the sound of someone bathing or showering when the bathroom is clearly empty, hearing water running and the splash of someone washing, sometimes accompanied by humming or soft singing. These auditory phenomena are detailed enough that witnesses can distinguish between the sounds of someone filling a bathtub, the sounds of showering, and the sounds of using the sink, suggesting that if this is a haunting, it's a remarkably specific one focused on bathroom rituals and routines. The first floor, beyond the bar area we've already discussed, has its own collection of oddities. The hotel lobby itself, that grand space that serves as the first impression for arriving guests, is the site of frequent sightings of a woman in a red dress. She's described as appearing to be in her 30s or 40s, elegantly dressed in a style from the 1940s, wearing a distinctive red dress that witnesses consistently mention. She's most often seen walking across the lobby from the front entrance toward the bar or the elevators, moving purposefully as if she has a specific destination in mind and is running late for an appointment. What makes this sighting particularly notable is that she's most often reported by people who aren't staying at the hotel, delivery drivers making drops, maintenance workers coming to service equipment, even people just walking past the hotel's windows who happen to glance inside. These witnesses have no investment in the hotel's haunted reputation and often don't even know about it until they mention what they've seen to staff. The woman in red is visible for just a few seconds, long enough to register her presence and note details about her appearance. And then she simply isn't there anymore, vanishing between one blink and the next. Some staff members who've worked at the hotel for many years claim to have seen her dozens of times, so often that she's become a familiar presence they almost take for granted. They've given her a nickname, the Lady, said with capital letters implied, treating her as an unofficial greeter who appears to welcome certain guests or perhaps to watch over the hotel she apparently loved enough to never leave. One longtime front desk clerk mentioned in an interview that she always feels reassured when she sees the lady, interpreting her presence as a sign that the hotel is doing well, that the spirit of hospitality and welcome that has defined the Monte Vista since its opening remains strong. The elevators, those necessary mechanical conveniences that carry guests between floors, have their own strange behavior patterns that staff has learned to accommodate. Both elevators will sometimes be called to floors where no one has pushed the call button, arriving at the second or third floor and opening their doors to reveal empty hallways with no one waiting to board. They'll sit there with doors open for the normal amount of time, as if passengers are boarding or exiting, and then close and return to service. Maintenance has checked the elevator control systems repeatedly, and they function normally in all testable ways, yet these phantom calls continue to occur multiple times each week. More strangely, some guests report riding in the elevator and feeling it becomes suddenly crowded, even though they can see they're alone in the car. They describe the sensation of other people pressing close, the elevator feeling full, as if carrying its maximum capacity, accompanied by the sense of presence, and sometimes the sound of breathing or quiet conversation, but remaining visually empty. These experiences last only for the duration of the elevator ride, ending as soon as the doors open at the guest destination floor, leaving them to wonder if they experienced something genuinely paranormal or if claustrophobia and the confined space simply triggered an anxiety response that their mind interpreted as ghostly presence. Room 112, one of the few guest rooms located on the first floor near the lobby, has earned a reputation among staff as the room where electronics fail most reliably. Guest phones and tablets drain their batteries impossibly fast in that room, sometimes going from fully charged to dead in just a couple of hours. Laptop computers behave erratically, freezing or crashing repeatedly. Digital cameras malfunction, refusing to focus properly, or producing images that are corrupted or show unexplained artifacts, strange light anomalies, or shadow shapes that weren't visible when the photo was taken. Even the television in the room has been replaced multiple times because it develops problems that make no technical sense, turning on by itself in the middle of the night, changing channels without anyone touching the remote, or displaying static and interference that doesn't affect televisions in adjacent rooms. Some paranormal researchers theorize that spirits or ghostly energy can affect electronic devices because they operate by manipulating electromagnetic fields, and modern electronics are highly sensitive to electromagnetic interference. If this theory is correct, then room 112 might be home to a particularly strong presence, one that generates or affects electromagnetic fields in ways that wreak havoc on sensitive electronic equipment. Guests who work in technical fields and who stay in 112 have sometimes brought EMF meters, devices that measure electromagnetic field strength, and have reported unusually high and fluctuating readings in the room, particularly in the corner near the window and in the closet area. The hotel's hallways themselves, those transitional spaces connecting the rooms, have their own phenomena that aren't tied to any specific location. Staff members working night shifts report regularly encountering cold spots that move through the hallways, as if something is walking through the space. Patches of air noticeably colder than the surrounding environment that drift slowly from one end of a corridor to the other. These moving cold spots are often accompanied by the sound of footsteps, creating the impression of an invisible person walking the halls, But these footsteps don't match the regular pattern of the bellboy's rounds on the third floor. These are random, occurring on all floors at unpredictable times, suggesting that the hotel might be home to multiple entities that wander its corridors for their own unknowable reasons. Housekeeping staff, who spend more time in the hotel's rooms and hallways than any other employees, have perhaps the richest collection of stories about odd occurrences. They report that certain rooms seem to resist being cleaned, as if some presence doesn't want to be disturbed. In these rooms, vacuum cleaners will unplug themselves repeatedly. Bed sheets that had just been changed will be found rumpled or pulled off the bed when the housekeeper returns from getting supplies from their cart. Towels carefully arranged in the bathroom will be found on the floor or rehung in different positions. It's as if someone is undoing their work as fast as they complete it, creating a frustrating game that makes cleaning certain rooms take twice as long as it should. Other housekeepers report more benevolent assistance, finding that certain rooms seem to clean themselves or at least cooperate unusually well with cleaning efforts. They might leave a room briefly and return to find that tasks they hadn't completed yet are somehow done, beds made more neatly than they remember making them, surfaces that should still be dusty, now spotlessly clean. These experiences are reported less frequently than the obstructive phenomena, but often enough to form a pattern, suggesting that whatever presences inhabit the hotel, some of them might actually appreciate the housekeeper's work and occasionally help rather than hinder. The hotel's stairwells, those concrete and steel spaces that serve as emergency exits and alternative routes between floors, have an oppressive atmosphere that many people comment on. The stairwells feel different from the rest of the hotel, colder and more claustrophobic, with acoustics that make every sound seem louder and more immediate. Multiple people have reported feeling followed or chased when using the stairs, experiencing an overwhelming urge to move faster, to reach their destination floor, and exit the stairwell as quickly as possible. Some describe hearing footsteps behind them that seem to be gaining, creating genuine panic and the feeling of being pursued by something they can't see, but that means them harm. Security camera footage of the stairwells, reviewed after guests or staff report unnerving experiences, occasionally shows anomalies that don't have obvious explanations. Shadow figures moving on camera, dark shapes that appear solid and human-sized, but which are present when the stairwell should be empty. Light anomalies, bright spots, or moving lights that appear on the footage but which don't correspond to any light source that should exist in those spaces. These documented anomalies are valuable because they provide objective evidence, recorded by automatic systems without human intervention. Those skeptics can always find potential explanations involving camera malfunctions or unusual light effects that don't require supernatural causes. The roof of the hotel, accessible only to maintenance staff and occasionally to guests during special events, has its own eerie reputation. Multiple maintenance workers report feeling watched when they're on the roof, experiencing the uncomfortable sensation of eyes on them, even though they can see they're alone up there. Some report seeing figures standing near the roof's edge, silhouettes visible for just a moment before vanishing, creating concerns about safety and whether someone might have unauthorized access to the roof. But investigations always reveal the roof to be secure and empty. No living person present to account for the sightings. There are also accounts, though these are rare and difficult to verify, of guests or staff members encountering full-body apparitions in various locations throughout the hotel, ghosts that appear completely solid and realistic rather than transparent or obviously supernatural. These encounters follow a pattern. Someone sees a person in period clothing, registers that the outfit seems anachronistic, perhaps tries to engage in conversation or simply watches the person for a moment, and then the figure vanishes or walks around a corner, and when followed is simply gone, nowhere to be found despite there being no exits they could have used. One particularly detailed account involves a housekeeper who encountered a woman in Victorian-era clothing, complete with an elaborate dress and hairstyle, standing in the second-floor hallway near the elevators. The housekeeper, assuming this was a guest dressed up for some event or photo shoot, smiled and said hello. The woman smiled back and nodded, but didn't speak, then turned and walked toward the stairwell. The housekeeper, curious about why someone would be in such formal historical costume, followed a few seconds later to ask about it, but when she reached the stairwell, the woman had vanished. The stairwell was empty in both directions, and there hadn't been enough time for anyone to descend or ascend out of sight. These full-body apparition encounters are perhaps the most challenging to explain away through conventional means because they involve witnesses who were fully awake and alert, who observe the figure in good lighting conditions, who try to interact with it, and who can provide detailed descriptions of clothing and appearance. They're seeing something solid and real-looking enough to be mistaken for a living person, not a transparent ghost or shadow figure or ambiguous shape that could be interpreted in multiple ways. The hotel's mechanical systems, the infrastructure hidden behind walls and beneath floors that keeps a building functioning, also seem to be affected by whatever forces create the Monte Vista's paranormal phenomena. The heating and cooling systems produce unexplained noises that sound like knocking or banging, sounds that occur in patterns rather than randomly, and that don't correspond to any mechanical issue. Plumbing sometimes makes sounds like voices or crying, as if the pipes are carrying more than just water through the building. The electrical system experiences fluctuations and surges that affect lights and outlets, but which can't be traced to any fault in the wiring or any external power issues. Maintenance staff, the people responsible for keeping all these systems functioning properly, have learned to distinguish between normal mechanical sounds and something else, something that uses the building's infrastructure to make itself known. They'll tell you that certain sounds mean the heating system needs attention, but other sounds, the ones that come in deliberate patterns or at specific times, those are the ghosts, and those you can't fix with a wrench or circuit breaker reset. You just acknowledge them, maybe speak to them respectfully if you're inclined towards such things, and go about your work. What emerges from cataloging all these different phenomena across the entire building is a picture of a hotel that's thoroughly haunted, not just in a few specific locations, but throughout its structure. The Monte Vista isn't a building with one or two ghost stories attached to it, but a location where the boundary between the living world and whatever comes after has become persistently thin and permeable, where multiple entities or energies or manifestations coexist with current guests and staff, where the past remains active and present in ways that challenge our understanding of how time and consciousness work. Some paranormal researchers who've investigated the hotel extensively believe that the Monte Vista might be what's called a portal location, a place where for some reason the veil between worlds is naturally thin, making it easier for spirits to manifest or for living people to perceive phenomena that are usually hidden. This could explain why the hotel has so many different types of manifestations, why new phenomena continue to be reported even in rooms that previously seemed quiet, why the activity level seems to increase rather than decrease over time. If the building sits on some kind of spiritual crossroads, then it would naturally attract and accumulate paranormal activity, becoming more haunted with each passing year as more entities discover this accessible threshold between existence and whatever lies beyond. Others theorize that the hotel's construction might have inadvertently created ideal conditions for hauntings, that the way the building is designed with its particular geometry and materials somehow captures or amplifies spiritual energy. This theory is more speculative and less widely accepted, but it's worth considering that human-built structures do create specific acoustic and electromagnetic environments, and if paranormal phenomena involve energy or vibrations, then the physical characteristics of a building could indeed affect how easily such phenomena manifest. Whatever the explanation, what's undeniable is that the Hotel Monte Vista has earned its reputation as one of America's most thoroughly haunted buildings. It's not just a location with one famous ghost, but a building alive with presence and personality, where every floor has its stories, every room its possibilities, and where anyone spending the night has a chance of experiencing something that will challenge their assumptions about what is and isn't possible in this world we think we understand so well. Part 6. The Staff's Perspective: Living and Working with Ghosts. If you really want to understand what it's like to be haunted, you don't ask the guests who spend a night or two and then leave with stories to tell. You ask the people who work in the building day after day, year after year, the staff members who have learned to coexist with phenomena that would send most people running. The employees of the Hotel Monte Vista, from front desk clerks to housekeepers to maintenance workers to bartenders, have developed a unique relationship with their building and its supernatural inhabitants, a relationship built on familiarity, respect, and a kind of resigned acceptance that their workplace operates according to rules that don't quite match the rest of the world. Talk to anyone who's worked at the Monte Vista for more than a few months, and you'll hear a variation of the same basic sentiment. The ghosts are real, they're there every day, and you learn to work around them or with them, depending on the situation and your own comfort level. New employees are usually warned during their training about the hotel's reputation and the kinds of things they might experience. But there's a difference between being told about ghosts and actually encountering them for the first time. That first experience, that moment when something happens that can't be explained by normal means, is transformative. It either drives people away quickly or it becomes a story they'll tell for the rest of their lives. The moment they had to expand their understanding of reality to accommodate things they previously considered impossible. Maria Gonzalez worked as a housekeeper at the Hotel Monte Vista for 17 years before retiring in 2015. In an interview conducted by a local paranormal research group, she described her first week on the job as a baptism by fire into the world of working in a haunted building. She was cleaning a room on the 3rd floor, working alone as she'd been trained to do, moving efficiently through her tasks. She had made the bed and was cleaning the bathroom when she clearly heard the sound of someone sitting down on the bed she'd just made, heard the distinctive creak of bed springs compressing under weight and the rustle of the bedspread. She came out of the bathroom expecting to find that the guest had returned to the room, perhaps having forgotten something, but the room was empty. The bed showed a clear indentation as if someone was sitting on it, but no one was there. Maria said her first instinct was to run, to leave the room immediately and tell her supervisor that something was wrong, that she couldn't work in that room. But she needed the job, had a family depending on her income, and she couldn't afford to quit on her first week. So she took a deep breath, spoke aloud to the empty room, saying, "Please let me finish my work. I'm just trying to do my job," and the indentation gradually smoothed out as if whoever had been sitting there had stood up and moved away. She finished cleaning the room without further incident, though her hands shook the entire time. That experience, frightening as it was, established a pattern that Maria followed for her entire career at the hotel. She treated the ghosts as she would any other people sharing her workspace. She was polite. She explained what she was doing and why. She asked for cooperation, and usually she received it. She became known among other staff members as someone the ghosts seemed to like or at least tolerate, someone who could enter even the most actively haunted rooms without triggering disruptive phenomena. She attributed this to respect, to treating the spirits as legitimate occupants of the building rather than as nuisances or threats. David Chun worked as a night auditor and front desk clerk at the Monte Vista from 2008 to 2016, working the overnight shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., when the hotel was mostly quiet and when paranormal phenomena were reportedly most active. He described the job as equal parts hospitality work and ghost encounter management. He learned which guests needed reassurance when they called the desk frightened by knocking or sound from their rooms, which ones prefer to have their experiences validated rather than explained away, and which ones needed to be moved to different rooms because what they were experiencing was too intense for them to tolerate. David kept a log, unofficial and not part of his required duties, a phenomena he personally experienced during his shifts. Over his 8 years in the position, he documented hundreds of incidents. Elevators called to floors with no one waiting, the sound of parties in the closed bar, phones ringing from rooms he knew were vacant, cold spots that moved through the lobby, and countless instances of feeling watched or sensing presence when he was alone at the desk during the quiet hours between 3 and 5 a.m., when even the hardiest night owls had usually retired to their rooms. He said the phenomena became so routine that he stopped being frightened by them, viewing them instead as the hotel's personality making itself known. He found himself talking to the empty lobby, sometimes during slow nights, narrating his activities or commenting on the news he was reading, as if the presences around him were company that broke up the solitude of working nights. He said it made him feel less alone, knowing that the building was never truly empty, even when no living guests were awake and moving around. Sarah Williams worked in housekeeping from 2010 to 2018, and her perspective on the hotel's hauntings was more skeptical than some of her coworkers. She believed that most of what people attributed to ghosts had mundane explanations. Sound were the building settling or pipes expanding and contracting. Cold spots were draft from poor insulation. Sightings were tricks of light and shadow combined with expectation. But even Sarah admitted that some of her experiences defied the explanations she preferred to rely on. She described cleaning room 210 one morning and finding that every item she set down would be moved while her back was turned. She'd place her spray bottle on the nightstand and turn to wipe the mirror, and when she turned back, the spray bottle would be on the dresser. She'd put it back on the nightstand and continue working, and minutes later, it would be somewhere else again. This happened at least a dozen times during that cleaning session, and Sarah finally spoke aloud in frustration. "Stop moving my things. I'm trying to work." And the movement stopped immediately, her supplies staying where she placed them for the rest of her time in the room. Sarah's rational mind wanted to attribute this to her own distraction, to her misremembering where she placed things, but she couldn't make that explanation work when she deliberately placed items in specific spots and watched them appear elsewhere. She never became a believer in traditional ghosts, but she acknowledged that something unusual happened in that hotel, something that interacted with the physical world in ways that deserve investigation and respect, even if she couldn't explain or categorize it to her satisfaction. The turnover rate for hotel staff can be quite high in the hospitality industry, but the Monte Vista has an interesting pattern. New employees either leave within the first few months, unable to tolerate the unexplained occurrences they encounter, or they stay for years, becoming veterans who know the building intimately and who develop their own strategies for coexisting with its supernatural elements. Those who stay tend to be people with a certain temperament. They're pragmatic rather than easily frightened. They're comfortable with ambiguity and mystery, and many of them find that working a haunted hotel is more interesting than working in a conventional establishment where every day is predictable and ordinary. James Rodriguez worked in maintenance at the hotel for over 20 years, retiring in 2019. His job required him to access every part of the building, from the roof to the basement, at all hours of day and night, responding to repair calls and conducting routine inspections. He said that the basement was the only area of the hotel that consistently made him uncomfortable, that gave him the feeling that something down there actively didn't want humans present. He never worked in the basement alone if he could avoid it, always bringing another maintenance worker or even a security guard to accompany him, even for simple tasks. James described the basement as feeling malevolent in a way that other parts of the hotel didn't. While the ghosts upstairs seemed to be former guests or employees going about their eternal business, whatever was in the basement felt different, more primal or primitive, less human. He couldn't put it into words more specific than that, but he trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him that the basement required caution and respect in a way that transcended the ordinary awareness of the hotel's hauntings. Despite his discomfort with the basement, James said he enjoyed working at the Monte Vista precisely because of its unusual character. He liked being able to tell people at parties or family gatherings that he worked in a haunted hotel, liked having stories that most people couldn't match, liked being part of an ongoing mystery that researchers and paranormal enthusiasts found fascinating. He never saw a full-body apparition himself, though he experienced plenty of unexplained sounds and movements and temperature changes. But he knew co-workers who had, and he believed their accounts because he knew these were honest people with no reason to lie. The hotel's management has evolved its approach to the paranormal aspects of the property over the decades. In earlier eras, management tried to downplay or hide the hauntings, worried that they would frighten away guests and harm the hotel's reputation. But as cultural attitudes toward the paranormal shifted and as ghost tourism became a recognized market segment, management began to embrace the hotel's haunted status as a unique selling point that differentiated the Monte Vista from generic chain hotels. Current management trains staff to handle paranormal-related guest inquiries and complaints with professionalism and respect. Staff are instructed to validate guests' experiences rather than dismissing them, to offer to move guests to different rooms if they're uncomfortable, but not to insist on it if guests prefer to stay where they are, and to be honest about the hotel's reputation while not exaggerating or embellishing the phenomena. This balanced approach allows the hotel to cater to both guests who are actively seeking paranormal experiences and those who are simply interested in staying in a historic property and who may or may not believe in ghosts. Staff meetings occasionally include discussions of recent paranormal occurrences, not as official business, but as a way of keeping everyone informed about what's been happening in different parts of the building. Newer employees can ask questions of veterans, learning strategies for dealing with specific phenomena or specific rooms. This institutional knowledge, passed from experienced staff to newcomers, helps maintain consistency in how the hotel handles its unique characteristics. There's also an unofficial support network among staff members who work in older, potentially haunted hotels in the region. Employees from different properties will sometimes compare notes, sharing stories and strategies, finding comfort in knowing that they're not alone in working in buildings that don't quite follow normal rules. This network has existed for decades, a kind of underground community of people who've learned to coexist with the unexplained and who understand that their experiences, while unusual, are shared by others in similar situations. One interesting pattern that emerges from talking to long-term staff is that almost everyone reports a decrease in fear over time. What terrifies them in their first encounters becomes familiar and eventually almost mundane through repetition and exposure. The human capacity for adaptation is remarkable, and it extends to adapting to regular contact with the paranormal. Staff members learn to distinguish between different phenomena, developing an almost casual expertise in identifying what type of haunting they're experiencing based on specific characteristics of sounds, sensations, or sightings. They'll tell you things like that's just the bellboy doing his rounds when they hear knocking on the third floor, or the lady is out tonight when they glimpse a woman in red in the lobby, or something's active in 210 when guests from that room call with reports of crying or manifestations. They've developed a taxonomy of the hotel's ghosts, categorizing and naming them, making them knowable and therefore less frightening. This naming and categorization is a way of asserting control, of making sense of experiences that could otherwise feel overwhelming or threatening to one's sanity. But even the most experienced and comfortable staff members admit that the hotel can still surprise them, that new phenomena can emerge or existing ones can escalate in intensity beyond what they're used to. These moments, when the familiar becomes strange again, serve as reminders that whatever haunts the Monte Vista isn't static or completely predictable, that consciousness or energy, or whatever we want to call it, has an element of unpredictability and agency that prevents the phenomena from becoming entirely routine or manageable. The staff's relationship with the hotel's ghosts also varies by individual temperament and worldview. Some staff members remain skeptical despite their experiences, preferring to attribute everything to natural causes, even when those causes seem implausible. Others become believers, interpreting their experiences through religious or spiritual frameworks that accommodate the possibility of souls surviving death. Still others adopt a more agnostic position, acknowledging that something unusual happens without committing to any particular explanation for what that something is. What unites all of them, regardless of their interpretation, is the shared experience of working in a building that behaves in ways buildings aren't supposed to behave, where the normal rules seem suspended or at least inconsistently applied. This shared experience creates bonds among staff members, a sense of being part of something unusual and maybe even important, of witnessing phenomena that most people never encounter and that science hasn't adequately explained. For many longtime employees, the Hotel Monte Vista becomes more than just a workplace. It becomes a place they feel connected to, almost protective of, as if the building and its ghosts are under their stewardship and care. They take pride in the hotel's history and its hauntings, becoming unofficial ambassadors who can speak knowledgeably about both the documented history and the supernatural legends. They're the keepers of stories, the ones who remember which rooms have had the most activity, which guests had the most dramatic encounters, which manifestations have been consistent over decades, and which ones are newer additions to the hotel's paranormal repertoire. When long-term staff members finally leave the Monte Vista, whether through retirement or career changes, many report that they miss not just their coworkers and the work itself, but the ghosts, the sense of living on the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary. Working in a normal building after years at the Monte Vista can feel bland and disappointing, lacking the personality and presence that made every day at the hotel potentially interesting and surprising. Some report that they've never again experienced anything paranormal after leaving the hotel, as if their sensitivity to such things was specific to that particular location, while others find that having opened themselves to perceiving the unusual, they notice phenomena in other places that they might have dismissed or overlooked before their time at the Monte Vista. The staff's perspective is crucial for understanding what it means for a building to be genuinely haunted as opposed to simply having stories attached to it. These are people who are there every day, who experience the phenomena regularly, who have no financial incentive to exaggerate or fabricate since they're paid hourly wages that don't change whether ghosts manifest or not. Their accumulated testimony over decades creates a compelling case that something genuinely unusual occurs at the Hotel Monte Vista, something that deserves serious attention and investigation rather than dismissal as folklore or marketing gimmick. Part 7. Theories and Explanations. What could be causing the phenomena? After exploring the various manifestations reported at the Hotel Monte Vista, the natural question emerges: what's actually causing all of this? Are these genuine paranormal phenomena, evidence of consciousness surviving death and spirits remaining tied to earthly locations? Or are there conventional explanations that could account for everything without requiring us to overturn our understanding of how reality works? Let's examine the major theories that researchers, skeptics, and believers have proposed to explain the Monte Vista's persistent hauntings. The most straightforward paranormal explanation is that the hotel is genuinely haunted by the spirits of deceased individuals who once lived, worked, or stayed there. This traditional ghost theory proposes that consciousness can survive the death of the physical body, and that under certain circumstances, these disembodied consciousnesses remain attached to locations that were significant to them in life. According to this theory, the bellboy continues his rounds because his identity and purpose were so strongly tied to his work that death didn't sever that connection. The woman in room 210 remains at her window because her emotional state at death, her grief and longing, was so intense that it essentially trapped her in that moment, replaying it endlessly. This explanation has the advantage of accounting for the intelligent, responsive aspects of the hauntings. It explains why the bellboy seems to respond to direct communication, why phenomena sometimes seem to react to the emotional states of witnesses, why there's consistency in the descriptions of specific entities across different witnesses who couldn't have coordinated their accounts. If actual conscious beings are present, then behaviors suggesting awareness and agency make sense in ways they don't if we're dealing with merely residual energy or psychological effects. However, the spirit theory faces significant challenges. It requires us to accept that consciousness can exist without a physical brain, which violates everything neuroscience has learned about the connection between brain function and mental experience. It provides no mechanism for how non-physical consciousness could affect physical objects like moving furniture or creating sounds. And it doesn't explain why ghosts would be bound by physical space at all, why they couldn't simply move on to wherever consciousness goes after death, rather than remaining trapped in hotel rooms for decades. A variation on the spirit theory that attempts to address some of these problems is the idea of psychic imprints or place memory. This theory suggests that traumatic or emotionally intense events can somehow impress themselves on the physical environment, creating a kind of recording that plays back under certain conditions. The space itself holds the information about past events, and sensitive individuals or people in certain mental states can perceive these recordings as if they're witnessing the actual events. This would explain residual hauntings like the woman at the window, endlessly waiting, behaviors that seem to replay the same scenario without awareness of current observers. If room 210 holds a psychic recording of a woman's grief and waiting, then guests staying there might be perceiving that recording when conditions are right, experiencing it as a visible apparition or as overwhelming emotional impressions that aren't their own. This theory has the advantage of not requiring conscious spirits or ongoing awareness after death, just information stored in the environment somehow. But psychic imprint theory struggles to explain the interactive aspects of the Monte Vista's hauntings. How does a recording respond to verbal communication? How does it know to stop knocking when someone says they're fine and don't need anything? Recordings play back. They don't adapt to current circumstances or respond to the people observing them. So while place memory might explain some phenomena, it can't account for everything reported at the hotel. Electromagnetic field theories represent an attempt to find more conventional scientific explanations for haunting reports. Some researchers have noted that strong or fluctuating electromagnetic fields can affect human brain function, potentially creating sensations of presence, feelings of being watched, anxiety, and even visual or auditory hallucinations. Old buildings with aging wiring and numerous electronic devices can produce complex electromagnetic environments that might affect sensitive individuals. The Hotel Monte Vista certainly has potential electromagnetic sources. Old wiring that's been patched and updated over decades, numerous electronic devices, cell towers, and Wi-Fi networks, all creating a soup of electromagnetic radiation at various frequencies. If certain rooms or areas have particularly strong or unusual electromagnetic fields, they might affect guests' neurological function in ways that create experiences interpreted as paranormal. The cold spots often reported could be explained by the electromagnetic effects on thermoregulation in the brain, creating the sensation of cold even when ambient temperature hasn't actually changed. This theory has the advantage of being testable and potentially verifiable through careful electromagnetic measurements correlated with reported phenomena. But it has significant limitations. It can't explain physical effects like objects moving or doors opening by themselves unless we propose that electromagnetic fields could somehow directly affect matter, which would itself be an extraordinary claim requiring extraordinary evidence. It also struggles to account for the specificity and consistency of reports. Why multiple people see the same figure of a bellboy or a woman in a red dress, rather than just experiencing generalized hallucinations that would vary widely between individuals. Infrasound, sound at frequencies below the range of human hearing, has been proposed as another potential conventional explanation for hauntings. Studies have shown that infrasound can create feelings of unease, anxiety, the sensation of presence, and even visual disturbances as it affects the human eye and brain in measurable ways. Old buildings with particular architectural features can act as resonance chambers for infrasound, which might be generated by wind, traffic, HVAC systems, or other environmental sources. If the Hotel Monte Vista structure creates infrasound hotspots in certain rooms or areas, this could explain why people consistently report uncomfortable feelings or sensations of presence in those locations. The Victorian-era woman reportedly seen in the hallway could be an infrasound-induced hallucination rather than an actual apparition. The oppressive feeling in the basement that makes staff uncomfortable could be caused by particularly strong infrasound in that space rather than malevolent spiritual presence. But again, this explanation has limits. Infrasound might account for feelings and vague impressions, but it can't easily explain specific detailed sightings that multiple witnesses describe similarly. It doesn't explain physical phenomena like objects moving or sounds of footsteps and knocking that are clearly audible rather than subliminal. And while infrasound can certainly make people uncomfortable, there's debate about whether it can create the kind of detailed, consistent hallucinations that would match witness descriptions. Psychological and sociological explanations focus on how expectation, suggestion, and cultural narratives shape perception and memory. When people know they're staying in a famously haunted hotel, their expectations prime them to interpret ambiguous sensory data as paranormal. The shadows and sounds that would be ignored or dismissed in an ordinary setting become potential ghost sightings in a location with a haunted reputation. Confirmation bias leads people to remember the unusual events that fit the ghost narrative while forgetting the many hours when nothing unusual happened at all. Social contagion and the power of suggestion could explain why reports cluster around certain rooms and phenomena. Once room 210 became known as the room with the sad woman at the window, guests staying there might unconsciously conform to that narrative, interpreting their experiences through that lens. Staff members discussing the Bellboy create a shared expectation that makes everyone more likely to attribute third-floor phenomena to that specific entity. The hotel's marketed reputation as haunted creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where people arrive expecting to experience something unusual and therefore perceive ambiguous events as confirming those expectations. This skeptical psychological approach can account for a lot of haunting reports, particularly the more ambiguous ones involving feelings, vague impressions, or experiences that aren't witnessed by multiple people simultaneously. It explains why haunting reports often lack the kind of definitive evidence that would satisfy scientific skeptics, because the phenomena being reported are partly or wholly constructed through perception and interpretation rather than being objective events that leave physical evidence. However, taken too far, this explanation becomes reductionist and dismissive in ways that don't do justice to the accumulated evidence from the Monte Vista. It struggles to explain cases where multiple witnesses report the same specific details without having communicated with each other. It can't easily account for physical phenomena captured on security cameras or other recording devices that operate independently of human perception and expectation. And it doesn't explain why certain types of phenomena cluster in specific locations rather than being randomly distributed throughout the hotel in ways that would match varying levels of expectation and belief among guests. Some researchers propose hybrid or multi-factor explanations that combine elements from different theories. Perhaps the hotel has both genuine paranormal phenomena in some cases and conventional explanations for other cases. Maybe environmental factors like electromagnetic fields or infrasound make certain people more susceptible to perceiving genuine psychic imprints or spiritual presences. Perhaps the power of collective belief and expectation can actually create or strengthen paranormal phenomena, making the hauntings more real and more intense through a feedback loop between consciousness and environment that we don't yet understand. These hybrid approaches have the advantage of not requiring us to choose between paranormal and conventional explanations, acknowledging that reality might be more complex than either pure skepticism or pure belief suggests. They allow for the possibility that some encounters at the Monte Vista are genuine paranormal events, while others have mundane explanations that happen to occur in a context where they're interpreted as ghostly. The portal or vortex theory, popular in some paranormal circles, proposes that certain locations have properties that make the boundary between our world and the spirit world unusually thin or permeable. According to this theory, the Hotel Monte Vista might sit on a natural portal or might have become a portal through decades of intense human activity and emotion. This would explain why the hotel has so many different manifestations rather than just one or two, why new phenomena continue to emerge, and why the activity level seems to maintain or even increase rather than fading over time. Portal theory is highly speculative and doesn't have a clear mechanism or testable predictions, which makes it more of a metaphysical claim than a scientific hypothesis. But it captures an intuition that many people report about the hotel, that it feels different, that something about the space itself is unusual in ways that go beyond just its history or architecture. Whether that difference is objective and detectable or purely subjective and psychological remains an open question. The quantum consciousness theories represent some of the most speculative attempts to bridge paranormal claims and modern physics. Some researchers have proposed that consciousness might have quantum properties that allow it to affect probability, to collapse quantum wave functions in ways that could influence physical systems. If consciousness can affect matter at the quantum level, perhaps strong emotions or intentions could leave lasting effects on an environment that persist after the conscious individual is gone. These theories draw on legitimate quantum physics concepts, but apply them in ways that most physicists would consider unjustified. Quantum effects typically only matter at extremely small scales and short time scales, and there's no accepted mechanism by which they could produce the kinds of large-scale, persistent effects that hauntings require. But some researchers argue that we simply don't understand consciousness well enough yet to rule out the possibility that it has unusual properties that could connect to quantum effects in ways we haven't discovered. Considering all these theories, what can we conclude about the Hotel Monte Vista? The honest answer is that we don't know for certain what's causing the phenomena. Each explanation has strengths and weaknesses. Each can account for some observations, but struggles with others. The truth might involve a combination of factors: genuine paranormal events mixed with misperceptions, environmental factors that enhance sensitivity to genuine phenomena, psychological factors that shape how experiences are interpreted and remembered, all interacting in complex ways. What we can say with confidence is that something unusual has been consistently reported at the Hotel Monte Vista for decades. Too many independent witnesses reporting similar phenomena to dismiss it all as fraud or imagination. Too much specificity and consistency to explain away as random misperceptions. Whether those phenomena represent spirits, psychic energy, environmental effects, psychological processes, or something we haven't even considered yet remains uncertain. This uncertainty, this gap between experience and explanation, is ultimately what makes locations like the Monte Vista so fascinating. They challenge our assumptions. They resist easy categorization. They remind us that despite our scientific and technological progress, there are still aspects of human experience that we don't fully understand. They stand as questions without definitive answers, inviting each generation to investigate anew, to bring new tools and new perspectives to old mysteries. For believers, the Monte Vista provides compelling evidence that consciousness survives death, that the world is stranger and more wonderful than materialist science admits, that there are layers of reality we're only beginning to perceive. For skeptics, it provides opportunities to investigate how perception and belief can create powerful subjective experiences that feel real even when they lack objective basis. For those in the middle, it provides mystery and wonder, the possibility that something genuinely unexplained is happening that might eventually teach us new things about consciousness, energy, and the nature of reality itself. The Hotel Monte Vista's greatest value might not be in definitively proving or disproving the existence of ghosts, but in keeping us curious, in reminding us that our understanding of the world is provisional and incomplete, in preserving spaces where the mysterious can still be encountered and experienced rather than explained away or ignored. As long as people continue to have unexplainable experiences in that building, as long as the phenomena persist across generations of guests and staff, the Monte Vista will continue to serve as a laboratory for investigating the boundaries of human knowledge and the possibilities that lie beyond what we think we know. Part 8. The Legacy and Cultural Impact. Beyond its function as a hotel and its reputation as a haunted location, the Hotel Monte Vista has become a cultural touchstone, a place that influences how people think about hauntings, about historic buildings, about the relationship between past and present. Its impact extends far beyond Flagstaff, reaching into popular culture, influencing paranormal research methodology, and contributing to broader conversations about preservation, tourism, and how we tell stories about places. The Monte Vista's appearance in paranormal television programming has brought it to national and international attention, introducing millions of viewers to its ghosts and its history. Shows like Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, and numerous other paranormal investigation programs have featured the hotel, usually focusing on its most famous manifestations like the Bellboy and the woman in Room 210. These television appearances have made the Monte Vista one of the most recognizable haunted locations in America, a status that brings both benefits and complications. On the positive side, television exposure has driven tourism to Flagstaff and to the hotel specifically. People who might never have heard of Flagstaff plan trips there specifically to stay at the Monte Vista, hoping for their own paranormal encounter or simply wanting to sleep in a room they've seen on television. This paranormal tourism brings revenue not just to the hotel, but to the broader community, as visitors eat at local restaurants, shop at local stores, and visit other Flagstaff attractions while they're in town. The economic impact of haunted tourism is significant enough that other communities have taken notice, with historic hotels and buildings in other cities attempting to document and promote their own paranormal histories in hopes of capturing some of the same interest. The Monte Vista's success has essentially created a template for how historic properties can leverage supernatural associations for preservation and economic benefit. However, television coverage also presents challenges. Paranormal shows tend towards sensationalism, using dramatic music, quick cuts, night vision footage, and jump scares to create tension and entertainment value. This presentation can exaggerate or misrepresent the actual character of the hauntings, making them seem more frightening or dramatic than the day-to-day reality at the hotel. Staff members and regular guests sometimes express frustration that television portrayals don't capture the more subtle, melancholic, or even mundane aspects of living with ghosts, focusing instead on the most dramatic elements in ways that feel exploitative. The hotel's management tries to balance these concerns, cooperating with some media productions while declining others, attempting to maintain control over how their property is portrayed while still benefiting from the publicity such appearances generate. They've learned to be selective about which shows they allow to film, preferring those that treat the subject matter with some respect over those that are purely interested in manufacturing scares. In paranormal research communities, the Hotel Monte Vista has become a kind of standard case study, a location that researchers return to repeatedly to test new equipment, try new methodologies, or simply because it's reliably active enough to provide interesting data. The hotel has been investigated by university parapsychology departments, independent research groups, amateur ghost hunters, psychics, and skeptical organizations, each bringing their own perspective and tools. This accumulated research, even though it hasn't definitively proven or disproven the hauntings, has value in documenting a consistent set of phenomena over decades. The Monte Vista's willingness to allow serious investigation has made it one of the better documented allegedly haunted locations in America. Researchers can compare data sets across different investigation teams in different time periods, looking for patterns or changes that might provide insights into how hauntings work or what conditions affect them. Some researchers have proposed that the Monte Vista could serve as a kind of baseline for paranormal research, a location where phenomena are common enough and consistent enough that they could be used to calibrate equipment or test investigative protocols. If a piece of ghost hunting equipment can't detect anything unusual at the Monte Vista, that might suggest the equipment isn't sensitive enough or isn't measuring what it's supposed to measure. If an investigation methodology doesn't yield results at a location as active as the Monte Vista, that might indicate problems with the methodology that need to be addressed. The hotel has also influenced discussions about historic preservation and adaptive reuse of old buildings. The Monte Vista demonstrates that historic properties don't need to be frozen in time as museums to have value and relevance. They can continue to function for their original purposes while maintaining their historic character and even their supernatural associations. The hotel's successful balance of modern amenities with historic atmosphere, of hospitality business with haunted reputation, provides a model for other historic hotels trying to remain competitive in contemporary markets. Preservation organizations have taken note of how the Monte Vista's haunted reputation actually aids preservation by creating public interest and economic support for maintaining the building. When people care about a building because of its stories and its ghosts, they're more likely to support preservation efforts, to visit and patronize the business, to advocate against demolition or insensitive renovation. The hauntings, whether real or legendary, give the building a living connection to its past that makes preservation feel important and meaningful rather than purely aesthetic or academic. In local Flagstaff culture, the Monte Vista occupies a special place as a point of pride and identity. It's Flagstaff's haunted hotel, a unique feature that distinguishes the town from countless other small cities along former Route 66. Local schools sometimes include the hotel in history lessons about Flagstaff's development and its connection to Hollywood's golden age. The hotel's ghosts have become part of local folklore, stories that get told and retold, adding to the sense of place and continuity that makes a community more than just a collection of buildings. The Monte Vista has inspired local artists, writers, and musicians. Paintings depicting the hotel or its ghosts appear in local galleries. Short stories and novels set partly or entirely in the hotel explore themes of memory, loss, and the persistence of the past. Local musicians have written songs about the lonely woman in room 210 or the bellboy who never stops working. This creative engagement with the hotel's legends keeps them alive and evolving, adding new layers of meaning and interpretation to the basic historical accounts. The hotel's influence extends into academic discussions across multiple disciplines. Folklorists study how ghost stories form, spread, and change over time, using the Monte Vista as a case study in contemporary legend formation. Sociologists examine how communities create and maintain shared narratives about place. Psychologists investigate how belief and expectation shape perception and memory. Hospitality management programs discuss how to balance unique character with standardized service quality. Each academic field finds something of interest in the Monte Vista's history and its hauntings. In popular culture beyond television, the Monte Vista appears in books, podcasts, YouTube videos, and social media posts. It's become a destination that people seek out not just for its supernatural associations, but as a pilgrimage site for anyone interested in Route 66 history, Hollywood's golden age, or Southwestern architecture and culture. The hotel represents multiple layers of history and meaning that appeal to different audiences, making it more than just a ghost hunting location. The Monte Vista has also contributed to ongoing debates about the nature of evidence and belief. Skeptics and believers both cite the hotel in support of their positions. Skeptics noting that despite decades of investigation, no definitive proof of ghosts has emerged from the Monte Vista. Believers noting that the sheer volume and consistency of reports must mean something beyond mere suggestion or misperception. The hotel serves as a test case for arguments about what should count as evidence, about the value of anecdotal testimony, about whether subjective experience has validity even in the absence of objective verification. These debates play out not just in academic journals or paranormal conferences, but in the hotel's guest book, in online reviews, in conversations between guests and staff. The Monte Vista creates spaces where people with radically different worldviews, skeptical materialists, and spiritual believers encounter each other and sometimes even find common ground in shared curiosity about the unexplained. The hotel's legacy includes its influence on how other allegedly haunted locations present themselves to the public. The Monte Vista's approach, embracing its reputation while maintaining its dignity and not resorting to cheap scares or manufactured hauntings, has become something of a gold standard. Other historic hotels look to the Monte Vista as an example of how to leverage paranormal associations for business benefit while still maintaining credibility and respect. This influence extends internationally. The Monte Vista appears in foreign language books and documentaries about American hauntings, introducing international audiences to this slice of American culture and history. People travel from Europe, Asia, and elsewhere specifically to stay at hotels like the Monte Vista, making haunted tourism a globally recognized phenomenon that crosses cultural and linguistic boundaries. The hotel has also played a role in changing attitudes toward the paranormal more broadly. By normalizing the idea that ghosts might exist and that experiencing them doesn't make you crazy or gullible, locations like the Monte Vista have contributed to a cultural shift where more people feel comfortable discussing supernatural experiences without fear of ridicule. The existence of well-documented haunted locations that can be visited and investigated provides a kind of legitimacy to paranormal claims that they might otherwise lack. This normalization has both positive and negative aspects. On the positive side, it allows for more open-minded investigation and discussion, reducing the stigma that prevented serious research for decades. On the negative side, it can lead to uncritical acceptance of paranormal claims, to the growth of pseudoscience and exploitation of believers by fraudulent mediums or ghost hunters. The Monte Vista, by maintaining relatively high standards and not exaggerating its phenomena, helps counter some of these negative tendencies while still supporting legitimate interest in the unexplained. Looking toward the future, the Hotel Monte Vista seems likely to continue its dual role as functioning hotel and paranormal destination for years or decades to come. As long as people continue to report unusual experiences there, as long as the building maintains its historic character, as long as management continues to balance hospitality with honoring the hotel's supernatural residents, the Monte Vista will remain a significant location in American ghost lore. Future technological developments might provide new ways of investigating or understanding the hotel phenomena. More sophisticated sensors, better recording equipment, advances in neuroscience and psychology all might contribute to solving mysteries that have persisted for nearly a century. Or they might deepen those mysteries by revealing new layers of complexity in phenomena we thought we understood. The hotel itself will continue to age, requiring ongoing preservation and renovation that will test whether hauntings persist through physical changes to the building. Each major renovation provides an opportunity to observe whether phenomena are affected by alterations to the structure, contributing to our understanding of whether hauntings are tied to specific materials and spaces or to something more abstract about location and history. New generations will discover the Hotel Monte Vista, bring their own expectations and interpretations, add their own experiences to the accumulated testimony. The ghosts, if that's what they are, will presumably continue their eternal rounds, knocking on doors, sitting at windows, walking hallways, oblivious to or perhaps amused by the attention they receive from the living. And the living will continue to wonder, to investigate, to tell stories, to try to understand what it means that this particular building, this one historic hotel in a mountain town in Arizona, refuses to behave like ordinary buildings, continues to generate experiences that challenge our understanding of reality itself. The legacy of the Hotel Monte Vista is ultimately about maintaining mystery in an age that often seems determined to explain everything, about preserving spaces where wonder and uncertainty can still be encountered, about honoring the past while remaining engaged with the present. It stands as evidence that some questions don't have easy answers, that some stories remain unfinished, that some places hold on to their secrets even as they share their legends with anyone willing to listen. And so we come to the end of our journey through the Hotel Monte Vista. Though of course the stories continue, the phenomena persist, the mysteries deepen rather than resolve. As you drift towards sleep tonight, or simply let your mind wander through the tales we've explored, consider what it means that a building constructed by community effort nearly a century ago has become a threshold between worlds, a place where the boundaries we usually assume are solid reveal themselves to be permeable, where past and present coexist in ways that challenge everything we think we know about time and consciousness and the nature of existence itself. We've walked the third floor with the phantom bellboy, hearing his knocks, feeling his diligent presence as he continues the rounds he started when he was alive, checking on guests with a dedication that death hasn't diminished. We've sat in room 210 with the lonely woman at the window, feeling her grief, witnessing her endless wait for someone who will never arrive, experiencing the weight of sorrow so profound it has somehow impressed itself onto the very walls and air of that space. We've raised a glass in a bar with the regulars who never left, hearing their laughter and conversation echoing from decades past, watching bottles rearrange themselves and feeling the cold spots that suggest presence without form. We've explored the theories that try to explain it all, from the straightforward supernatural to the resolutely skeptical, from electromagnetic fields to psychic imprints to the power of suggestion and belief. And we've seen how none of these explanations fully satisfies, how each leaves questions unanswered, how the truth, if we could know it definitively, might be stranger and more complex than any single theory proposes. The Hotel Monte Vista stands as a reminder that the world retains its mysteries despite our best efforts to explain everything. Science has given us remarkable insights into how reality works, from quantum mechanics to neuroscience, but there remain phenomena that resist easy categorization, experiences that thousands of people report, but that don't fit neatly into materialist frameworks. The hotel doesn't prove that ghosts exist in any way that would satisfy rigorous scientific standards, but it also refuses to allow easy dismissal, accumulating too many accounts from too many witnesses to ignore. Perhaps what matters most isn't whether we can prove definitively that the Monte Vista is haunted, but rather what we do with the experiences that occur there. Do we dismiss them automatically because they conflict with our worldview? Do we accept them uncritically because they confirm what we want to believe? Or do we sit with the uncertainty, acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, remaining open to possibilities while also maintaining healthy skepticism? The staff members who work there have found their own answers, practical accommodations that allow them to function in a building that doesn't behave the way buildings should. They've learned to coexist with the unexplained, to show respect to presences they can't see, but whose effects they witness regularly. They've demonstrated that humans are remarkably adaptable, capable of expanding our definitions of normal to include things that once would have seemed impossible. The guests who've stayed there and reported unusual experiences have been changed by their encounters, even if they're not sure what those encounters meant. Something happened to them in that building, something that made them question their assumptions, something that opened possibilities they hadn't considered before. Whether they interpret their experiences as ghostly encounters, as electromagnetic effects, as psychological phenomena, or as something entirely different, they've had their world expanded, their certainty challenged, their curiosity engaged. This is perhaps the greatest value of places like the Hotel Monte Vista. They keep us curious. They preserve mystery in an age that often seems determined to demystify everything. They remind us that despite our technological sophistication and scientific knowledge, we don't have reality completely figured out. There are still questions without answers, still experiences that don't fit our models, still reasons to wonder and investigate and remain humble about the limits of our understanding. As you settle into sleep tonight, imagine yourself in room 210, feeling that weight of sadness that guest described, seeing that figure at the window waiting for someone who will never come. Imagine walking the third floor hallway and hearing those footsteps behind you, that purposeful stride of someone with duties to perform and turning to find no one there. Imagine sitting at the bar late at night and hearing the murmur of conversations from patrons you can't see, feeling the building alive with presences from its long history. These imaginings, whether they prepare you for an actual visit to the Monte Vista or simply give you stories to contemplate as sleep approaches, connect you to that place and its mysteries, make you part of the ongoing narrative that has been building for nearly a century. Every person who hears about the Monte Vista's hauntings, who considers the possibilities, who wonders what might really be happening in that building, becomes part of the story, contributing to the hotel's legacy and to the broader human project of trying to understand reality in all its strange and wonderful complexity. The knocking that comes from nowhere, that distinctive sound of someone seeking entry or attention, that phenomenon that launched our exploration tonight, continues to echo through the Hotel Monte Vista's hallways. It wakes guests in the middle of the night, challenges their assumptions, demands acknowledgement. Whether it's created by the Bellboy's spirit, by residual energy, by environmental factors, or by something we haven't even considered, it's real in the sense that people genuinely hear it, genuinely react to it, genuinely struggle to explain it. And perhaps that's enough. That reality, that undeniable experience of the strange and the unexplainable. Perhaps we don't need to resolve every mystery or answer every question. Perhaps some things are meant to remain mysterious, to continue challenging us, to remind us that for all our progress and knowledge, we're still explorers in a reality far more complex and surprising than we often remember. The Hotel Monte Vista will still be standing tomorrow, its doors open to travelers seeking a night's rest and to curious souls seeking encounters with the impossible. The bellboy will continue his rounds. The woman will remain at her window. The bar will host both visible and invisible patrons. The building will keep its secrets while sharing its stories, maintaining that careful balance between revelation and mystery that has made it one of America's most fascinating haunted locations. Before we part ways, I want to thank you for spending this time with me, for letting me guide you through the shadows and mysteries of the Hotel Monte Vista. I hope these stories have intrigued you, maybe unsettled you a little, certainly given you something to think about as you drift towards sleep or continue with your day, wherever and whenever you're listening to this. I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to know that these stories are being heard in different places, different time zones, different contexts, all of us sharing these mysteries across distances. If you've had your own experiences with the unexplained, whether at the Hotel Monte Vista or elsewhere, share those stories in the comments. This community thrives on shared experiences, on the courage it takes to admit that sometimes we encounter things we can't explain that challenge our understanding of how the world works. If there are other mysterious places, other strange events, other unexplained phenomena you'd like to hear about in future episodes, let me know in the comments. Mystery History for Sleep covers the full spectrum of the strange and unexplained, from haunted locations like the Monte Vista to unsolved mysteries, from conspiracy theories to cryptids, from lost civilizations to modern enigmas. Your suggestions help guide where we explore next, what stories we investigate, what mysteries we unravel together. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Hotel Monte Vista and its persistent ghosts, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell so you'll know when new episodes are released. Every subscription helps us continue creating these long-form, detailed explorations of mysteries that deserve more than superficial treatment, that reward patient listening and contemplation. Share this episode with friends who appreciate the mysterious, who enjoy ghost stories, who like to fall asleep to the sound of someone telling tales of the strange and unexplained. Word of mouth from listeners like you is how channels like ours grow and thrive, how we're able to continue producing content that goes deep rather than staying shallow, that respects your intelligence and curiosity. And maybe, if you find yourself in Flagstaff, Arizona, if you're traveling Route 66 or visiting the Grand Canyon or just exploring the beautiful high country of northern Arizona, consider staying at the Hotel Monte Vista. Book room 210 if you're brave and curious, or request the third floor if you want to hear the bellboys knock. Spend an evening in the bar and see if the regulars make themselves known. Walk those hallways late at night and feel the weight of history, the presence of all those who've passed through over nearly a century, the mystery that refuses to resolve itself. The hotel needs visitors, both skeptics and believers, both casual travelers and serious investigators, because that's how its story continues, how the phenomena persist, how the mysteries deepen. Every guest adds to the accumulated testimony. Every experience contributes to our understanding or deepens our confusion. Every encounter keeps the questions alive and prevents the answers from becoming too certain or comfortable. As you close your eyes tonight, as sleep finally claims you, let the mysteries of the Monte Vista drift through your dreams. Let the bellboy knock on your dream door. Let the woman at the window share her grief. Let the bar patrons raise their glasses in silent toast. Let these stories remind you that the world is stranger than we often admit, more mysterious than we're usually comfortable acknowledging, more full of possibility than our daily routines sometimes allow us to recognize. Sleep well, dream deeply, and remember that in a world that often seems completely mapped and explained, places like the Hotel Monte Vista preserve spaces for wonder, for uncertainty, for the delicious possibility that we don't know everything, that reality holds surprises, that the impossible might just be possible after all. Part 10. The Night Shift, when the hotel truly awakens. There's something profoundly different about the Hotel Monte Vista after midnight, when most guests have retired to their rooms and the lobby sits empty except for the night clerk stationed behind the front desk. The character of the building shifts in these quiet hours, as if the hotel has been waiting all day for the crowds to thin, for the noise to fade, for the opportunity to reveal its true nature without the distraction of too many living presences diluting the atmosphere. Night shift employees at the Monte Vista speak of these hours with a mixture of acceptance and unease, their testimonies providing some of the most compelling evidence that something genuinely unusual occurs within the hotel's walls. Unlike guests, who experience the phenomena for a night or two before checking out and returning to their normal lives, night shift workers encounter the hotel's strangeness repeatedly, building up a relationship with whatever forces animate the building that goes far beyond simple fear or curiosity. Consider Marcus, who worked the front desk night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for 6 years before moving to a day position. In interviews with paranormal researchers, he described his experiences with the kind of weary matter-of-factness that comes from having the impossible become routine. He said that on quiet nights, particularly weekdays in the off-season when few guests occupied the rooms, he could hear the hotel come alive around him. Footsteps on the floors above, not the occasional sound of a guest walking to the bathroom or moving around their room, but organized patterns of movement, back and forth pacing, multiple sets of footsteps moving in what sounded like purposeful patterns. He learned to distinguish between the sounds of living guests and the sounds of whatever else occupied the building. Living guests moved randomly, sporadically, following the unpredictable rhythms of individual needs and impulses. The other footsteps followed patterns, the same routes traveled repeatedly, sounds that occurred at consistent times across different nights, as if whatever created them was following a schedule or routine that death hadn't altered. Marcus also spoke of the elevator, which would sometimes descend to the lobby on its own, the doors opening to reveal an empty car when he was certain no one had called it. The first few times this happened, he checked with housekeeping and maintenance, thinking perhaps staff on the upper floors were using the elevator for their work. But the elevator solo trips occurred on nights when he knew he was the only person awake in the building, when housekeeping had finished hours earlier and guests were asleep. The elevator would descend, pause at the lobby level with its doors open for exactly the amount of time it would take someone to step out, then close and ascend again, as if an invisible guest had just arrived and was heading to their room. He reported lights turning on and off in empty sections of the hotel, visible through the lobby windows when he stepped outside for fresh air during the slow pre-dawn hours. Lights in guest rooms that he knew were vacant would illuminate, stay on for varying lengths of time, then extinguish, no pattern predictable enough to be explained by automatic timers or electrical issues. Maintenance checked the electrical system repeatedly, finding nothing wrong, no shorts or faulty switches that would cause lights to turn on spontaneously. The most unnerving aspect of Marcus's night shift experience was what he called the feeling of being watched. He described it as an almost physical sensation, a tingling awareness that eyes were observing him even though he appeared to be alone. This feeling was strongest in certain areas, particularly the hallway leading to the basement stairs and the corridor on the first floor that connected the lobby to the bar. He learned to recognize when the sensation was present and when it wasn't, developing an instinct for the hotel's moods, times when it felt empty, even if haunted, and times when it felt actively occupied by presences that paid attention to him. The night shift experience isn't limited to the front desk staff. Maintenance workers who respond to emergency calls during overnight hours, security personnel doing rounds, even the occasional guest who ventures out of their room to get ice or visit the vending machines, they all report similar experiences. The hotel at night feels different, more alive in ways that have nothing to do with human activity, more present and aware, as if the building itself or whatever inhabits it is most active when the living presence is minimal. One security guard who worked at the Monte Vista for several years before retiring told a story about conducting his nightly rounds through the hotel. His routine involved walking every floor, checking doors to ensure they were properly locked, verifying that fire exits were clear and emergency lights were functioning, looking for any problems that might need immediate attention. On the third floor, he would often encounter what he came to think of as cold pockets, areas where the temperature dropped noticeably for no reason he could identify. These cold pockets weren't stationary. He would walk through one, feel the temperature drop, and then return to normal as he continued down the hallway. But on subsequent rounds, the cold spot would have moved, sometimes just a few feet, sometimes to a completely different section of the floor. He also reported hearing his name called while conducting these rounds, a voice that sounded conversational rather than threatening, as if someone was trying to get his attention for a mundane reason. But when he would turn to respond, he would find himself alone in the hallway. This happened frequently enough that he stopped responding to the voice, simply acknowledging it with a nod and continuing his rounds, treating it as he might treat a colleague who was trying to get his attention for something non-urgent. This adaptation, this process of learning to coexist with the hotel's phenomena rather than being constantly startled or frightened by them, is common among long-term employees. They develop strategies for managing their experiences, creating mental frameworks that allow them to do their jobs despite regularly encountering things that violate their understanding of how reality should work. Some frame it in religious terms as spirits or ghosts in a traditional sense. Others avoid labeling it entirely, simply accepting that these things happen at the Monte Vista without needing to define or explain them. The night shift reveals patterns in the hotel's activity that aren't as apparent during busy daytime hours. Certain locations seem more active at specific times, as if the entities or energies that create the phenomena follow schedules. The third-floor hallway typically shows the most activity between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., the hours when the bellboy is most frequently seen and when the knocking phenomena are most commonly reported. Room 210 seems most active slightly earlier, between midnight and 2 a.m., when guests report seeing the woman at the window or hearing the sounds of crying. The bar area, conversely, remains active later, with phenomena often reported between 3 a.m. and dawn, as if the entities that gather there are night owls even in death, preferring the latest hours when even the dedicated drinkers among the living have finally gone to bed. Staff opening the bar in the morning have reported finding glasses arranged in patterns they didn't create, sometimes forming shapes or letters, though the meaning of these arrangements remains unclear. Skeptics suggest that closing staff might create these patterns unconsciously or as pranks, but the patterns appear even after nights when the closing staff swear they left everything in standard positions. There's also the phenomenon that several night shift workers have described as the gathering, though they struggle to articulate exactly what they mean by this. On certain nights, maybe once or twice a month with no predictable schedule, the hotel feels more occupied than usual, even when guest bookings are low. The sense of presence intensifies, the sounds increase in frequency and clarity, and some workers report feeling as if they're in the way, as if the living presence is an intrusion on some event or gathering that the building's other occupants are conducting. These nights make even experienced employees uncomfortable, creating a desire to stay in well-lit areas, to avoid the empty corridors and unused sections of the building, to count down the hours until sunrise and the arrival of day shift staff breaks the spell. Nobody knows what creates this intensification, whether it's connected to phases of the moon or anniversaries of past events, or some other factor entirely. But the pattern is consistent enough across different employees, people who've worked different shifts and wouldn't have had opportunities to influence each other's perceptions, that it suggests something genuine is varying in intensity over time. The night shift experience of the Hotel Monte Vista provides some of the strongest evidence for the reality of the phenomena, precisely because these witnesses aren't seeking paranormal experiences. They're trying to do their jobs, earn their paychecks, get through their shifts without incident. They have every motivation to downplay or dismiss unusual occurrences rather than to exaggerate or fabricate them. The fact that they consistently report similar experiences, despite this motivation to maintain normalcy, suggests that what they're encountering is real in some sense, resistant to explanation or dismissal. When dawn approaches and the night shift ends, employees report that the hotel's character changes again, the intensity of presence fading as morning light fills the windows and the first-day shift workers arrive. It's as if the hotel's other occupants retreat with the darkness, returning to wherever they exist when they're not making their presence known, waiting for the next night to arrive so they can emerge again and walk their eternal rounds. Part 11. The Unexplained Room 107 and Other Mysteries. While rooms like 210 and 305 receive most of the attention from paranormal enthusiasts and researchers, the Hotel Monte Vista contains other locations with their own mysterious occurrences that deserve exploration, even if they haven't achieved the same fame as the hotel's more celebrated haunted spaces. Room 107, located on the first floor near the main staircase, has accumulated its own collection of strange reports over the decades, though the phenomena there differ in character from the better-known hauntings elsewhere in the building. Guests in room 107 don't report seeing apparitions or hearing phantom footsteps. Instead, they describe a profound sense of disorientation upon entering the room, as if the space itself distorts perception in subtle ways. Some report that the room feels larger on the inside than its dimensions should allow, while others describe the opposite sensation, feeling as if the walls are closer than they appear visually. Several guests have mentioned difficulty with spatial reasoning while in a room, bumping into furniture they thought they were clear of, reaching for objects that turn out to be inches farther away than their hands expected. These spatial distortions, if that's truly what they are, might have mundane explanations related to the room's design or lighting. But the consistency of reports suggests something more unusual might be occurring. Guests also mention experiencing unusual dreams while sleeping in room 107, dreams with a recurring theme of being lost in a building that constantly shifts and changes, hallways that lead to different destinations each time they're traversed, rooms that rearrange themselves when not being observed. Upon waking, guests report that these dreams felt more vivid and real than normal dreams, leaving them unsettled in ways they struggle to articulate. The second floor, beyond room 210's famous manifestations, has its own collection of unexplained phenomena. Room 220 is known among staff for having objects that persistently move from where they're placed. Housekeepers report arranging items in specific positions, leaving the room, and returning minutes later to find the same items rearranged differently. This happens too frequently and consistently to be explained as memory errors or guests moving things between cleaning visits. Yet no explanation for the movements has been identified. There's also the matter of the photographs. Over the decades, countless guests and investigators have taken photographs throughout the Hotel Monte Vista, and a surprising number of these images contain anomalies that resist easy explanation. Orbs of light appear in photos taken with different cameras in different eras, from film cameras of the 1970s through modern digital cameras and smartphones. While many orbs can be explained as dust particles or water droplets reflecting the camera's flash, some appear too large or too luminous to fit this explanation comfortably. More intriguing are the photographs that show shadows or dark masses in areas where no person or object should cast such shadows, or the occasional image that seems to capture a figure or partial figure, a face or hand or silhouette that no one saw at the time the photograph was taken. These images have been analyzed by photography experts and skeptics, many dismissed as artifacts of the photographic process or tricks of light and shadow, but some remain difficult to explain away entirely, particularly those captured on film rather than digital sensors, where the possibilities for accidental artifacts are more limited. The hotel's basement, which we touched on earlier, deserves additional attention as a location where phenomena occur that don't fit the pattern of the more famous hauntings. Unlike the bellboy's purposeful rounds or the woman's melancholy presence, the basement feels actively hostile according to multiple staff members, a space that doesn't want human presence and makes that desire known through oppressive atmosphere and occasional experiences that border on aggressive. Staff report being touched in the basement, not gently like someone seeking attention, but shoved or grabbed. Sudden physical contact that leaves no marks but creates genuine fear. Objects fall from shelves when no one is near them, sometimes appearing to be thrown rather than simply falling due to poor stacking or vibration. The overwhelming sense of being unwelcome intensifies in certain areas of the basement, particularly the oldest sections that date to the hotel's original construction, suggesting that whatever creates this hostile atmosphere has been present since the beginning, predating the accumulated activity in the guest rooms above. These lesser-known aspects of the Hotel Monte Vista's paranormal landscape remind us that hauntings are often more complex than the simple ghost stories that circulate in popular culture. The Monte Vista isn't just home to a bellboy and a lonely woman. It's a location where reality seems more flexible than elsewhere, where multiple types of phenomena coexist, where some presences seem benign while others feel threatening, where the boundary between normal and paranormal is constantly being negotiated by everyone who spends time within its walls.